The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through stars, planets, and the vast emptiness between. For millennia, the Jedi believed they understood this power. The Sith knew they could corrupt it. Emperor Palpatine had bent it to his will, reshaping an entire republic into his empire. But none of them, not the wisest Jedi Master, not the most ancient Sith Lord, not even Darth Sidious himself, had ever encountered a power that existed entirely outside the Force. A power older than galaxies. A power that kneeled to nothing and no one. That power had a name, Darkseid. The dimensional rift opened without warning above Mustafar, the volcanic hellscape where Darth Vader had been born from Anakin Skywalker's burning corpse. Imperial sensors registered the anomaly immediately, a tear in space itself, radiating energies that matched no known technology. Hyperspace distortions rippled outward like waves across a blood-red ocean. The lava rivers below churned violently as reality buckled. Then the boom tube erupted. A column of cosmic fire pierced the ash-choked sky, wider than a star destroyer, crackling with energies that made the Force itself recoil. Through this impossible gateway came ships, angular, brutal constructs of dark metal covered in glowing circuitry that pulsed like infected veins. Behind them, the silhouette of something massive. Something that radiated power so absolute that even the Darkseid trembled. Darkseid, Lord of Apokolips, God of Tyranny, stepped through the rift and gazed upon a new galaxy to conquer. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body carved from living stone and divine power. Cracked gray skin covered muscles that could shatter moons. His eyes burned with the Omega effect, twin points of crimson fury that held the power to unmake reality itself. He wore battle armor darker than the void between stars, and his very presence warped the space around him. This was no mortal conqueror. This was a new god. Behind Darkseid came his herald, a squadron of Parademons, twisted insectoid soldiers shrieking as they poured through the boom tube by the hundreds, then thousands. Apokoliptian warships followed, their weapons charging with energy signatures that Imperial scanners couldn't classify. On Coruscant, 12,000 light-years away, Emperor Palpatine stirred in his meditation chamber. His yellow Sith eyes snapped open. He had sensed something through the Force, no, not through the Force. Something adjacent to it. Parallel. A power that operated on entirely different principles, yet somehow threatened to eclipse even his own dark side mastery. Curious, Palpatine whispered, his ancient voice carrying equal parts intrigue and concern. Most curious indeed. In the Mustafar System's orbital shipyard, Vice Admiral Kendrick of the Imperial Navy received the sensor reports with growing alarm. An unidentified fleet had emerged from nowhere. No hyperspace signatures. No approach vector. They simply existed where nothing had been moments before. All batteries, open fire, Kendrick ordered from his command throne aboard the Star Destroyer Subjugator. Destroy those ships immediately. Launch all TIE squadrons. I want. The subjugator exploded. Not from a torpedo or turbolaser strike. It simply ceased to exist in a flash of red light. Darkseid had glanced at it, and his Omega beams had reached across the void of space to unmake nearly 2 kilometers of Imperial war machine as easily as a man might swat an insect. 37,000 crew members died in an instant. Their screams in the Force were a whisper compared to the roar of Darkseid's power. Primitive, Darkseid rumbled, his voice resonating across multiple dimensions. This galaxy mistakes technology for strength. They know nothing of true power. The remaining Imperial ships opened fire, turbolasers, ion cannons, concussion missiles, every weapon at their disposal. The Apokoliptian warships raised energy shields that shimmered with Mother Box technology far beyond anything the Empire had encountered. The barrage washed over them harmlessly, and then the Apokoliptian vessels returned fire. Their weapons didn't just destroy ships. They converted them. Molecular restructuring beams tore through Imperial hulls, transforming Durasteel and living crew into raw materials that the Apokolipsian ships absorbed and integrated into their own mass. The Imperial fleet wasn't being defeated, it was being harvested. Parademons swarmed the surviving ships, their claws ripping through blast doors and bulkheads. Imperial stormtroopers fired desperately, their blaster bolts barely slowing the creatures down. When Parademons died, 3 more took their place. When stormtroopers fell, something worse happened. The Parademons dragged the wounded and the dead back to their ships. Back to the conversion chambers. Within hours, those Imperial soldiers would rise again, twisted, broken, transformed into new Parademons to swell Darkseid's armies. Death was not an escape from Apokolips. It was recruitment. Within 6 hours, the Mustafar system belonged to Darkseid. 12 Imperial ships destroyed or assimilated. 43,000 personnel killed, captured, or converted. The volcanic planet itself began to change as Apokolipsian terraforming technology activated, reshaping the lava flows into perfect geometric patterns, the first foundations of a new fortress. Darkseid stood upon a promontory of black stone, looking out across this new galaxy. His quest for the anti-life equation had brought him across dimensional barriers before, but never to a realm quite like this. He could sense something here, an energy field that permeated everything, that connected all living things in a web of causality and power. Interesting. Perhaps this force these beings spoke of in their final moments might hold the key he had sought for eons. Darkseid, Darkseid commanded, and from the shadows emerged his chief torturer and scientist, a withered being whose sadistic genius had broken countless worlds. Study this galaxy. Learn its powers, its governments, its weaknesses. I want a complete analysis within the week. As you command, Great One, Darkseid hissed, his mind already racing with possibilities for experimentation. Darkseid's eyes blazed brighter. Somewhere in this galaxy, someone powerful had noticed his arrival. Someone who commanded the dark aspect of this force. How entertaining. Send our message across all frequencies, all languages, Darkseid ordered. Let this galaxy know what comes for them. Across tens of thousands of worlds, Imperial HoloNet communications crackled and died. Every screen, every projector, every communication device in the galaxy simultaneously displayed the same image, Darkseid's face, carved from divine stone, eyes burning with the Omega effect. When he spoke, his voice resonated in the minds of every being who witnessed the transmission, bypassing technology entirely to imprint directly upon consciousness itself. I am Darkseid. I am the end of all things. Your weapons are meaningless. Your armies are fodder. Your governments will kneel or be erased. I seek the anti-life equation, and I will tear this galaxy apart to find it. Resistance is futile. Hope is illogical. Freedom is a lie you tell yourselves before sleep. There is only Darkseid. There is only obedience. You have one standard day to send your mightiest to face me at Mustafar, or I will come for you. And when I come, I do not come alone. The transmission ended, leaving trillions of beings across the galaxy staring at blank screens in dawning horror. In his throne room on Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine smiled. A rival had emerged, one who clearly understood nothing of the dark side or the Empire's true power. How delightful. It had been so long since anyone had dared challenge him openly. Lord Vader, Palpatine spoke into his comlink, his voice dripping with malicious anticipation. Prepare your flagship. We have a god to educate about the realities of power in this galaxy. In the Outer Rim, aboard the modified frigate Tantive 4, Princess Leia Organa watched the transmission with mounting dread. Mon Mothma stood beside her, face pale. The Empire will respond with overwhelming force, Mon Mothma said quietly. This Darkseid will face the full might of Palpatine's war machine. Then we pray they destroy each other, Leia replied, though her voice carried no conviction. She had felt something watching that transmission, a cold, absolute certainty that whatever this being was, it made the Emperor seem almost human by comparison. On Tatooine, an old hermit named Ben Kenobi felt the disturbance ripple through the Force like a stone thrown into still water. But this wasn't a disturbance in the Force, it was something pressing against it from outside, like a hand pushing against fabric. He had never felt anything like it in all his years as a Jedi. "What are you?" Obi-Wan whispered to the desert wind. The galaxy would soon learn the answer, and the lesson would be written in ash and ruin. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Emperor Palpatine did not believe in gods. He had spent decades studying the dark side, unraveling secrets the ancient Sith had died to protect, and transforming himself into the most powerful Force wielder the galaxy had ever known. He had orchestrated the fall of the Jedi Order, corrupted the Chosen One, and reshaped an entire republic into an instrument of his will. Gods were fairy tales the weak told themselves to explain powers they couldn't comprehend. But this Darkseid creature, this warranted personal attention. The Executor, Darth Vader's super-star destroyer, cut through hyperspace toward the Mustafar system with an escort fleet of 20 star destroyers. 64,000 personnel, 300 TIE fighter squadrons, and enough firepower to reduce a planet to molten slag. The Emperor had not joined the fleet personally, he was many things, but foolish was not among them. Instead, he watched through the Force, his consciousness tethered to Vader's, experiencing the confrontation through his apprentice's senses. Vader stood on the Executor's bridge, his respirator creating its rhythmic mechanical breathing that had become synonymous with death across 1,000 systems. He felt his master's presence coiled in the back of his mind like a patient serpent, watching, analyzing, waiting. "We are approaching Mustafar, Lord Vader," Admiral Piet reported, his voice admirably steady despite the tension crackling through the bridge crew. Everyone had seen the transmission. Everyone knew what had happened to Vice Admiral Kendrick's fleet. "Proceed," Vader commanded, his voice filtered through his mask into something barely human. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace, and the bridge crew collectively inhaled sharply. Mustafar had changed. The volcanic planet's natural chaos had been replaced with perfect geometric order, lava channels flowing in precise patterns, surface structures rising in angular formations that hurt to look at directly. Apokolipsian architecture didn't follow conventional physics. It imposed its own logic on reality, and reality bent to accommodate it. Orbiting the planet were 30 warships unlike anything in Imperial databases. They were pyramidal, brutalist, covered in circuitry that pulsed with sickly crimson light. Between them flew thousands of Parademons, their shrieks transmitted across open channels like a choir of the damned. And standing on a platform of reshaped volcanic rock, arms crossed behind his back, was Darkseid. "So, the God of Tyranny's voice boomed across all frequencies, the local dominion sends its champions." How predictable. Vader felt the Emperor's interest sharpen through their connection. Palpatine was probing outward with the Force, trying to measure this being's power, to find the connection point where all living things touched the cosmic energy. But there was nothing. Darkseid existed in a void, not empty, but filled with something else entirely. Something that operated on fundamentally different principles. "You will surrender immediately," Vader stated, his voice carrying the absolute authority of the Empire. "You will submit to Imperial jurisdiction. Resistance will result in your annihilation." Darkseid laughed. The sound carried no humor, only the infinite contempt of a being who had conquered 10,000 worlds and broken gods who thought themselves mighty. "I am Darkseid," he replied simply. "I do not surrender. I do not submit. I am Dominion. Your empire is a child's sandcastle before the tide of Apokolips. Kneel, machine man, and I may grant you the honor of serving me." Through their Force bond, Vader felt his master's cold fury ignite. Palpatine did not tolerate defiance, especially not wrapped in such casual dismissal. The Emperor's will pushed through Vader like a blade, urging destruction. "Open fire," Vader commanded. "All batteries." Reduce that platform to atoms. The executor's weapons blazed to life. 5,000 turbolasers, ion cannons, and missile batteries fired in perfect synchronization, enough destructive power to crack a moon's crust. The accompanying star destroyers added their own firepower, creating a wall of energy that would have vaporized any conventional target. Darkseid raised one hand. The Omega effect flared around him, reality-warping energy that existed before physics had rules. The incoming fire simply stopped. Turbolaser bolts and missiles hung frozen in space, suspended by power that regarded the laws of thermodynamics as polite suggestions rather than absolute constraints. Then Darkseid clenched his fist. The suspended weapons' fire reversed trajectory and accelerated back toward the Imperial fleet at twice their original velocity. Shields flared as star destroyers were struck by their own weapons. The subjugator's sister ship, the Domination, took a full barrage to its port side and listed dangerously, venting atmosphere and debris. Primitive, Darkseid observed. You wage war with energy and matter, never understanding that both are merely expressions of deeper equations. Let me demonstrate true power. His eyes flared crimson, and the Omega beams lanced across the void. Unlike turbolasers that traveled in straight lines, the Omega beams curved through space, tracking their targets with impossible precision. They didn't just move, they pursued, following evasive maneuvers, bending around obstacles, patient and implacable as death itself. A star destroyer attempted to jump to hyperspace. The Omega beams followed it into the hyperspace tunnel, caught it mid-jump, and the ship simply ceased to exist across both normal space and hyperspace simultaneously. 27,000 lives snuffed out like candle flames. Vader's gloved hands clenched. He reached deep into the dark side, drawing on decades of rage, pain, and hatred. The Force responded, a black tide of raw power that he directed outward with surgical precision. Darkseid's platform began to crack, the volcanic rock beneath the god's feet fracturing as Vader attempted to telekinetically tear it apart. For the first time, Darkseid's expression shifted to something resembling interest. Ah, he said, examining the Force energy like a scientist observing a curious specimen. So this is the power I sensed. This Force. How quaint. You manipulate the binding energy of living consciousness, channeling it through emotional resonance. Clever, in a primitive way. Vader poured more power into his assault. The platform exploded in a shower of molten rock. Darkseid fell toward the lava rivers below. And stopped in mid-air, hovering through his own power, untouched and unimpressed. My turn, Darkseid said. The Omega beam struck Vader with the force of a collapsing star. Pain. Inconceivable, absolute pain that transcended anything Vader had experienced, even the agony of burning on Mustafar's shores. The Omega effect didn't just attack his body. It attacked his existence, attempting to unmake the very concept of Darth Vader from reality's equations. But Vader was not so easily erased. His armor was Beskar-reinforced durasteel, his cybernetics powered by both technology and Darkseid augmentation. More importantly, his will, forged in betrayal, loss, and hatred, was absolute. He had survived transformation into a living machine. He had endured decades of his master's casual cruelty. He would not be unmade by this pretender god. Vader raised his hand, and the Force answered with desperate fury. He caught the Omega beams in a telekinetic grip, redirecting them upward where they dissipated against Mustafar's ash-choked atmosphere. His respirator labored, his systems overloaded, warning lights flashing across his internal HUD. That single exchange had nearly destroyed him. Palpatine's presence surged through their bond, feeding Vader Darkseid energy, sustaining him. The Emperor had felt that attack, analyzed it, and recognized something terrifying. This being's power wasn't unlimited, but it operated on such a fundamentally different level that conventional Force techniques were like trying to cut durasteel with a butter knife. Interesting, Darkseid acknowledged. You survived the Omega effect. Few can make that claim. You have strength, Machine Man. But strength without purpose is wasted. Join me. Help me find the anti-life equation, and I will grant you power beyond your master's wildest comprehensions. I serve one master, Vader rasped, each word painful through his damaged systems. And you are not him. Then you will serve as an example. Darkseid's Parademon legions launched from his warships, not hundreds anymore, but tens of thousands, a shrieking swarm that blotted out Mustafar's red sky. They crashed against the Imperial fleet like a tide of claws and fangs, overwhelming point defense systems through sheer numbers. Stormtroopers aboard the Star Destroyers formed firing lines, their blasters cutting down Parademons by the dozens. But for every creature killed, others dragged Imperial personnel back to conversion chambers. And worse, some Stormtroopers were beginning to transform mid-battle, their armor cracking as Apokolipsian technology overwrote their biology in real time. Through the bridge viewport, Vader watched an entire hangar bay fall to the Parademon swarm. He felt each death through the Force, points of light winking out, replaced by twisted voids where consciousness had been replaced with programming. All ships, Vader commanded, his strategic mind cutting through emotion. Retreat. Full hyperspace jump. Now. But Lord Vader, we can't, Admiral Piet began. Now. The Imperial fleet jumped to hyperspace in a chaotic scatter pattern, leaving behind 4 Star Destroyers too damaged to escape. Darkseid watched them flee with something approaching disappointment. They learn quickly, at least, he observed. Decide, harvest the abandoned ships. I want their technology analyzed and their crews processed. This galaxy has potential soldiers in abundance. As the Apokolipsian forces swarmed the derelict Star Destroyers, Darkseid turned his gaze toward the point where the Imperial fleet had vanished into hyperspace. Through the residual energy signatures, he could trace the route back to its origin. A planet called Coruscant. The seat of this empire's power. How perfect. Every conquest began with cutting off the head. The emergency session of the Imperial Moff Council convened 6 hours after the Mustafar disaster. Holographic projections of the Empire's most powerful governors flickered to life around the circular chamber, their faces displaying varying degrees of concern, anger, and carefully concealed fear. At the head of the table sat Grand Moff Tarkin, his gaunt features carved into an expression of controlled fury. Emperor Palpatine observed from his throne, shrouded in shadows, saying nothing. Beside him stood Darth Vader, his armor still bearing scorch marks from the Omega beams, several systems operating at reduced capacity. The Dark Lord's breathing was more labored than usual, a detail not lost on the assembled Moffs. 4 Star Destroyers lost, Moff Jerjerrod reported, his voice tight. 46,000 personnel unaccounted for. Mustafar system completely compromised. And we have confirmed reports of transformations. Stormtroopers being converted into these creatures. Worse, Grand Admiral Thrawn interjected, his red eyes glowing in the holographic blue. The Chiss tactical genius had been recalled from the unknown region specifically for this crisis. Our sensors detected 0 emissions consistent with conventional power sources from the hostile vessels. Their energy signatures suggest technology operating on principles outside known physics. This is not merely an advanced civilization. This is something fundamentally different. Tarkin's fingers steepled. Your recommendation, Admiral? Containment, Thrawn stated without hesitation. Establish a quarantine perimeter around the Mustafar system. Deploy our fleet in defensive positions around critical systems. We must study this enemy before committing to full engagement. Their leader, this Darkseid, demonstrated capabilities that neutralized Lord Vader's assault. We cannot afford to underestimate. Unacceptable, Vader's voice cut through the discussion like a vibrablade. The Empire does not cower behind defensive perimeters. We will mass our forces and crush this incursion with overwhelming firepower. With respect, Lord Vader, Thrawn replied, his tone remaining professional despite addressing a being who had strangled officers for lesser disagreements. Overwhelming firepower proved ineffective at Mustafar. This entity reflected our own weapons back at us and survived direct force assault. Brute force is precisely what he expects. The temperature in the chamber dropped several degrees as Vader's rage manifested physically. But before he could respond, Emperor Palpatine finally spoke, his ancient voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel through flesh. "Peace, my apprentice," Palpatine said, the words gentle but carrying absolute authority. "Admiral Thrawn raises valid concerns. This Darkseid is unlike anything we have encountered. His power exists outside the Force, yet it rivals the dark side in raw destructive capacity." The Emperor's yellow eyes gleamed with something that might have been excitement. "He claims to seek something called the anti-life equation. Tell me, Admiral, what have our intelligence divisions learned?" Thrawn manipulated the holographic display, bringing up translated data recovered from captured Apokolipsian transmissions. The anti-life equation is, according to intercepted communications, a mathematical proof that demonstrates the futility of free will. A formula that, once spoken or broadcast, would strip sentient beings of all desire for independence, making them perfectly obedient slaves. He paused. "If such a thing exists, and this dark side believes it can be found in our galaxy." The implications hung in the air like a death sentence. Every Moff understood immediately, an equation that eliminated free will would give its possessor absolute control over every living being in the galaxy. Not through force manipulation or political maneuvering, but through mathematical certainty. Palpatine leaned forward, his interest now undisguised. "Fascinating. And he believes our galaxy contains this equation?" "Unknown, Your Majesty," Thrawn replied. But his message specifically mentioned tearing our galaxy apart to find it. Whether he has genuine leads or is simply casting a wide net remains unclear. Tarkin cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, if I may, this dark side has made a critical error. His brazen declaration has united the Empire against a common threat. We can mobilize the entire Imperial Navy. Deploy the Death Star once construction completes. Flood the Mustafar system with so many ships that even his advanced technology cannot possibly." A proximity alarm screamed through the council chamber. Every hologram flickered. Lights dimmed. And across every screen in the Imperial Palace, across every holoprojector on Coruscant, across the planetary defense grid and every communication relay, the same image appeared. Darkseid's face, carved from stone, eyes burning with the Omega effect. "Greetings, Emperor Palpatine," Darkseid's voice resonated through the Force itself, making several Moffs stumble. Vader's hand instinctively went to his lightsaber. "I have studied your empire these past hours. Vast, yes. Powerful, certainly. But built on the antiquated principles of fear and military might. How, pedestrian." Palpatine's expression never changed, but through the Force, Vader felt his master's fury ignite like a supernova. No one hijacked the Emperor's communications. No one invaded his palace's systems. No one dared address Darth Sidious with such casual dismissal. "I offer you a choice," Darkseid continued. "Join me. Your empire becomes an extension of Apokolips. Your military serves my conquest. Your resources fuel my search for the anti-life equation. In exchange, I will grant you a privileged position in the New Order. You will rule this galaxy in my name, and when I find the equation, you will be among the first to witness its glory." Thrawn's eyes widened slightly, the Chiss equivalent of shock. "He's broadcasting from Coruscant. He's already here." Chaos erupted in the council chamber. Moffs shouted orders to their defense forces. Tarkin demanded immediate planetary lockdown. Vader ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade casting blood-red shadows across the walls. But Palpatine simply smiled, a thin, cruel expression that had preceded the deaths of Jedi Masters and the fall of governments. "How very bold of you, Darkseid," the Emperor said, his voice carrying across whatever channel the god was using. "To come to my throne world. To offer me terms as though I were some provincial governor awaiting instruction. You claim to be a god, yet you understand nothing of the power you face. I understand perfectly, Darkseid replied. You are a wielder of this force, the quantum entanglement of living consciousness manipulated through emotional resonance. Impressive for a mortal, certainly. You have bent an entire galaxy to your will through a combination of this power and strategic brilliance. But you are still bound by the limitations of organic life and primitive physics. Lightning crackled around Palpatine's fingers. Then come to my throne room, pretender. Let us discuss these limitations in person. I accept your invitation. A boom tube erupted in the center of the council chamber. The portal tore reality open like paper, cosmic fire consuming holographic projectors and sending moths scrambling backward. The sound was beyond description, dimensional barriers screaming as they were violated, the fundamental laws of physics protesting the intrusion. Through the portal stepped Darkseid. His physical presence was overwhelming. 3 meters of living stone and divine power, eyes blazing with the Omega effect, armor darker than the void between galaxies. The council chamber's environmental system strained under the sheer mass of his existence, not just physical weight, but ontological pressure. He was real in a way that made everything else seem like pale shadows. Vader moved immediately, lightsaber raised, reaching deep into the dark side. The Force responded, and the Sith Lord unleashed a telekinetic assault that had once crushed AT-AT walkers like tin cans. Darkseid didn't move. The telekinetic pressure washed over him like water over stone, accomplishing nothing. He looked at Vader with the same expression one might give an insect, mildly interesting, ultimately irrelevant. We have already tested our powers, Machine Man, Darkseid said calmly. You survived the Omega effect through force of will and cybernetic augmentation. Admirable. But do not mistake survival for victory. Palpatine rose from his throne, Force lightning already dancing across his fingertips. The Emperor's power filled the room like a physical presence, decades of Darkseid mastery channeled through rage and ambition that had toppled the Jedi Order itself. You speak of equations and physics as though they make you superior, Palpatine hissed, his voice dropping into the predatory tone that had corrupted Anakin Skywalker. But you understand nothing of the Force. It is not merely energy to be manipulated. It is the will of the galaxy itself, and I am its master. Are you? Darkseid asked, and for the first time, genuine curiosity entered his voice. Then show me, Sith Lord. Show me what makes you believe yourself a god among men. The Emperor unleashed hell. Force lightning exploded from his hands, not the measured torture he typically employed, but the full devastating power he had used to cripple rebel fleets and reduce Jedi Masters to ash. The lightning was so intense it turned the air into plasma, so concentrated it warped space around its path. Darkseid raised one hand, and the Omega effect blazed to life around him. The Force lightning struck an invisible barrier 3 meters from the god's body and simply dissipated. Not reflected. Not absorbed. Unmade at the quantum level. Interesting, Darkseid observed, his expression unchanging despite the apocalyptic energies being directed at him. Your power manipulates probability and causality through living consciousness as a medium. But my Omega effect operates on a more fundamental level. I don't bend reality's rules, I rewrite them. Your lightning exists because physics allows electrical discharge. I can make physics forget that rule. Palpatine's attack intensified, drawing so deeply on the dark side that shadows in the room began moving independently, responding to his fury. The Emperor's eyes blazed yellow, his face contorting into a rictus of absolute rage and power. And Darkseid stood unmoved, studying the assault like a professor observing a student's examination. Enough, the god finally said, and the word carried weight that transcended language. It was command written into the fabric of existence itself. The Force lightning stopped, not because Palpatine chose to cease, but because Darkseid's will made it impossible to continue. The Emperor staggered, shock registering on his ancient face for the first time in decades. You are powerful, Emperor, Darkseid acknowledged. More powerful than most beings I have encountered. But you are not my equal. You never were. He turned, his burning eyes sweeping across the assembled Moffs, Vader, and finally returning to Palpatine. I came here to offer terms because I recognize efficiency. Conquering this galaxy system by system would waste resources. Join me, and this transition happens peacefully. Refuse. He let the threat hang unspoken. Palpatine's face twisted into a snarl that revealed the true monster beneath the political mask. I am Darth Sidious, master of the dark side, emperor of the galaxy. I bow to no one. Not to the Jedi, not to the Republic, and certainly not to an interdimensional warlord with delusions of godhood. Then we are at an impasse, Darkseid observed. Unfortunate. You would have been useful. The Omega beams flared, and Vader threw himself in front of his master, lightsaber raised. The beam struck the blade and for a moment, just a moment, the Kyber crystal held, channeling force energy to deflect reality-warping power. Then the lightsaber exploded, and Vader was thrown backward through 3 walls. Darkseid turned to leave, walking toward the still-open boom tube. You have 1 week to reconsider, Emperor. After that, Apokolips comes in force. And when I take this galaxy, I will take it in fire and conversion. Your empire will become raw materials for mine. You will find, Palpatine said, his voice once again controlled, deadly calm, that this galaxy has faced extinction-level threats before. The Sith. The Jedi. Ancient evils that predate your apocalypse. And we endure. We always endure. Darkseid paused at the threshold of the portal, looking back over his shoulder. Those threats were bound by the rules of your reality. I am not. Remember that, when the sky fills with parademons and your worlds begin to burn. The boom tube collapsed, taking Darkseid with it, leaving behind only scorch marks and the lingering smell of ozone mixed with something else, something that didn't belong in this universe. In the sudden silence, Tarkin found his voice. Your Majesty, what are your orders? Emperor Palpatine stared at the space where Darkseid had stood, his mind racing through centuries of Sith knowledge, searching for any reference to beings who existed outside the Force. He found nothing. The ancient Sith had encountered Force-resistant species, Force-immune creatures, even technologies that disrupted Force powers. But never something that simply operated on entirely different fundamental principles. Summon every Moff, every Grand Admiral, every Inquisitor, Palpatine commanded, his voice carrying the cold certainty of absolute authority. Mobilize the entire Imperial Navy. Accelerate Death Star construction by any means necessary. And, he paused, yellow eyes gleaming with calculation, activate Protocol Omega. It is time to remind this galaxy that the Empire's might is absolute. Vader pulled himself from the rubble, his system sparking, his respirator damaged but functional. Through their force bond, he felt his master's thoughts, cold calculation mixed with something Vader hadn't felt from Palpatine in years. Uncertainty. The message reached the Rebel Alliance 3 days after Darkseid's invasion of the Imperial Palace. It came through encrypted channels, bounced across a dozen anonymous relays, and arrived at the hidden base on Yavin 4 with no clear origin point. Mon Mothma read it twice before calling an emergency council meeting. It's from an Imperial Moff, she said, her voice strained with disbelief. Moff Panica of the Naboo sector. He's requesting asylum and offering strategic intelligence in exchange for protection. General Jan Dodonna, the rebellion's chief military strategist, leaned forward across the holographic tactical display. His weathered face showed the skepticism of a man who had survived decades of warfare through caution. It's a trap. The Empire wants to infiltrate our command structure. I don't think so, Princess Leia interjected, studying the encrypted datapad. Look at the intelligence he's already provided. Imperial fleet deployments around Coruscant, Death Star construction timetables, defensive grid specifications. This information is too valuable to be bait. Unless they want us to believe it's valuable, Commander Willard argued. The Empire has been hunting us for years. One defecting Moff conveniently appears right when we're gaining momentum. Mon Mothma raised her hand, silencing the debate. There's more. Moff Panica claims the Empire is facing an existential threat. Something called Darkseid has invaded Imperial space, demonstrated power that exceeds even the Emperor's Force abilities, and demanded the Empire's surrender. The council chamber fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances that mixed confusion with barely concealed hope. The idea that something could threaten the Empire, truly threaten it, seemed too impossible to believe. I've heard rumors, Bail Organa said quietly. The senator had maintained his cover as an Imperial loyalist while secretly funding the rebellion, giving him access to information most rebels never saw. Whispers through my contacts on Coruscant. 4 Star Destroyers lost at Mustafar. Lord Vader himself injured. The Emperor calling emergency sessions with every Moff in the Empire. Something happened. Something bad enough to make Palpatine nervous. The Emperor doesn't get nervous, Dodonna stated flatly. He orchestrated the Clone Wars, corrupted the Chosen One, and executed Order 66. He's beyond fear. Everyone has limits, Leia said, and her voice carried weight beyond her years. She had seen the Empire's cruelty firsthand, watched her adoptive father navigate its political minefields, and felt the oppression that crushed billions under its boot. If this Darkseid is powerful enough to make Palpatine reconsider his position, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Mon Mothma nodded slowly. Agreed. But the question remains, what do we do about it? If the Empire is genuinely threatened, does that make this Darkseid our ally? Our enemy? Both? Before anyone could answer, the base's communication officer rushed into the chamber, his face pale. Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission. It's broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. We can't block it. The holographic display flickered, died, and then reconstituted itself into an image that made everyone in the room instinctively reach for weapons. Darkseid's face filled the projection, eyes burning with the Omega effect, carved features radiating power that transcended the technological medium. When he spoke, his voice resonated not just through speakers but through the room itself, as if the walls had decided to convey his words. People of the rebellion, Darkseid began, and the fact that he knew about them, knew exactly where to direct his message, sent chills through every person present. You fight against the Empire, seeking freedom from tyranny. A noble goal. Futile, but noble. Leia's hand moved to her blaster. Bail placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. I am Darkseid, Lord of Apokolips, and I have come to your galaxy seeking the anti-life equation, a mathematical truth that will bring order to chaos, certainty to doubt, and obedience to all who would resist destiny. Your empire has refused my generous offer of alliance. Therefore, I will take this galaxy by force. The hologram shifted, showing images that made Dodonna curse under his breath. Mustafar, transformed into an apocalyptic fortress. Star destroyers being systematically dismantled and absorbed into alien war machines. And worst of all, stormtroopers mid-transformation, their armor cracking as Parademon physiology overwrote their human biology. I am aware that you consider yourselves enemies of the Empire, Darkseid continued. You believe you fight for freedom, for choice, for the right of sentient beings to determine their own destiny. How quaint. Let me show you the truth. The image changed again. This time it showed a planet, not imperial, based on the architecture. Independent system, probably outer rim. Civilian population centers, markets, schools. Normal life. Then the Parademons came. What followed was systematic slaughter. Not the brutal but comprehensible violence of imperial occupation, but something far worse. The Parademons didn't just kill, they harvested. Civilians dragged screaming into conversion chambers. Children transformed into shrieking monsters. Entire populations processed like raw materials. This is what awaits your galaxy, Darkseid stated, his tone conversational, as if discussing weather patterns. Every system. Every world. Every being from the most powerful force wielder to the weakest child will serve Apokolips or be converted into soldiers who will. There is no negotiation. There is no mercy. There is only Darkseid. The hologram focused back on his face. I offer you the same choice I offered your emperor, join me, and your transition will be painless. Continue your rebellion, and you will be among the first I convert. You have 3 days to send representatives to Mustafar. After that, I will come for you. And unlike the Empire, I do not make empty threats. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in shell-shocked silence. Mon Mothma spoke first, her voice carefully controlled despite the horror they just witnessed. We need to verify this. Send reconnaissance to that planet. We can't, the communications officer interrupted, his voice shaking. That transmission included coordinates and timestamp. It happened 4 hours ago. I've already cross-referenced with our intelligence network. The planet was Ryloth. Independent. Population 8 million. Our contacts there, he swallowed hard. They've gone silent. 8 million. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. This changes everything, Bail Organa said quietly. If what we just saw is real, if this being can do what he claims, then the Empire isn't our primary enemy anymore. The Empire is always our enemy, Leia shot back, her voice sharp with anger. They've oppressed billions, destroyed worlds, hunted us like animals. Just because something worse has appeared doesn't erase their crimes. But it does mean we face a choice, Mon Mothma interjected. Do we continue fighting the Empire while this Darkseid tears the galaxy apart? Do we try to negotiate with him? Or... She paused, the words clearly difficult, do we consider a temporary alliance with Imperial forces against a common threat? The suggestion sparked immediate protest. Half the council began speaking at once, voices rising in anger and disgust. The idea of allying with the Empire, even temporarily, was anathema to everything the rebellion stood for. Dodonna's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. The old general rarely raised his voice, and the uncharacteristic outburst silenced the room. I understand the objection. I've lost friends, family, and entire units to Imperial brutality. But Mon Mothma is right, we face an impossible choice. If we do nothing, Darkseid will conquer the galaxy. If we fight him alone, we'll be crushed. We're a guerrilla force, not a standing army. We don't have the resources to face this threat. And the Empire does? Commander Willard challenged. They couldn't stop him at Mustafar. Lord Vader himself was defeated. What makes you think their fleet will fare any better? Because, a new voice interjected from the chamber entrance, the Empire has something you don't. Numbers, resources, and the Death Star. Every weapon in the room immediately pointed at the figure standing in the doorway. Moff Panica raised his hands slowly, showing he was unarmed. Behind him stood 3 rebel guards, weapons trained on his back, looking apologetic for letting him reach the council chamber. How did you get here? Leia demanded, her blaster steady on his chest. I defected, as my message indicated, Panica replied calmly. Your security is excellent, but I've been an Imperial Moff for 15 years. I know how to navigate hostile territory. He looked at Mon Mothma. I came because I need you to understand something. The Emperor is terrified. That statement broke through the tension like a thermal detonator. Terrified. Emperor Palpatine. The words didn't belong in the same sentence. I was present at the council meeting when Darkseid invaded the Imperial Palace, Panica continued, lowering his hands slowly. I watched him appear through a portal that shouldn't exist. I saw the Emperor unleash force lightning powerful enough to reduce a Star Destroyer to slag. And I watched Darkseid stand there, completely unharmed, and lecture Palpatine about the limitations of the Force like a professor correcting a student. He stepped fully into the room, ignoring the weapons tracking his movement. The Emperor is mobilizing every ship in the Imperial Navy. He's activated Protocol Omega, a contingency plan that pulls forces from every sector, including ones guarding against you. He's accelerating Death Star construction regardless of cost. And most telling, he's reaching out to old Separatist cells, offering amnesty in exchange for their droid armies. The Separatists were destroyed, Bail Organa said, but his voice carried uncertainty. The Separatist leadership was destroyed, Panica corrected. But their droid foundries still exist, mothballed across dozens of systems. The Emperor is reactivating them because he needs soldiers, disposable soldiers that can be thrown at Darkseid's forces without depleting human personnel. Dodonna's tactical mind was already working through implications. Battle droids. Thousands of them. Combined with the Imperial Navy and potentially the Death Star, he looked at Mon Mothma. It might be enough. If Darkseid's forces can be overwhelmed through sheer numbers. They can't, Panica interrupted. That's what you're not understanding. Darkseid doesn't just kill soldiers. He converts them. Every stormtrooper that falls becomes a Parademon. Every ship captured becomes raw material for his fleet. The longer the battle lasts, the stronger he becomes. Traditional warfare won't defeat him. Then what will? Leia asked, her voice tight. Panica met her gaze. I don't know. But I know that if the Empire and the Rebellion keep fighting each other while Darkseid conquers the galaxy system by system, we'll all end up in his conversion chambers. That's why I'm here. Not to ask for forgiveness or to betray the Empire. I still believe in order, even if I've lost faith in Palpatine's vision of it. I'm here because someone needs to broker a ceasefire before it's too late. Mon Mothma studied the moth for a long moment. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that trusting an Imperial officer would lead to betrayal and death. But she had led the rebellion long enough to recognize truth when she heard it, even from an enemy's mouth. What are you proposing? She asked carefully. A meeting, Panica replied. Rebel leadership and Imperial command. Neutral ground. Discuss terms for a temporary ceasefire while we address the Darkseid threat. Once he's dealt with, if that's even possible, you can go back to destroying each other. The Emperor would never agree to this, Bail Organa stated. The Emperor doesn't know I'm here, Panica admitted. But Grand Admiral Thrawn does. And Thrawn is perhaps the only being in the galaxy whose strategic genius rivals Palpatine's tactical cunning. He understands that pride is a luxury we can't afford right now. Before anyone could respond, alarms screamed through the base. Red emergency lights flooded the council chamber. The communications officer's voice crackled over the intercom, barely controlled panic bleeding through. We have incoming. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Reading as. I don't know what these are, they're not in any database. But there are hundreds of them. And they're launching what looks like biological missiles toward the planet. Through the Force, though she would never have admitted she could feel it, Leia sensed something wrong. Not danger in the traditional sense, but wrongness. As if reality itself was being violated by whatever approached Yavin 4. On the tactical display, alien ships materialized in orbit. Pyramidal. Brutal. Covered in glowing circuitry that hurt to look at directly. Apokolips had found them. And they had less than 3 days. The Yavin 4 defense grid activated with desperate speed. Turbolasers mounted in ancient Massassi temples powered up, their targeting computers locking onto the descending Apokolipsian warships. X-wings and Y-wings scrambled from hidden hangars, pilots racing to their cockpits with the practiced efficiency of veterans who knew every second mattered. Commander Willard coordinated the defense from the command center, his voice cutting through the chaos with practiced authority. All fighters, engage at maximum range. Do not, I repeat, do not let those biological missiles reach the surface. Point defense batteries, prioritize incoming projectiles over capital ships. Dodonna stood beside him, studying the tactical display with the calculating gaze of a man who had survived more battles than most could count. Those aren't standard invasion craft. They're too small, too fast. This isn't a conquest fleet, it's a harvesting operation. Mon Mothma's face had gone pale. The conversion chambers. He's not here to negotiate. He's here to collect raw materials. In the council chamber, Moff Panica moved to the viewport, watching the alien ships descend through Yavin's atmosphere with terrible grace. This is faster than expected. He must have been tracking Imperial communications, intercepted references to your base location. He turned to face the rebel leadership. You need to evacuate. Now. This base cannot be defended against what's coming. We have thousands of personnel here, Leia protested. Pilots, technicians, support staff. We can't evacuate that many people before. The first biological missile struck the jungle canopy 3 kilometers from the main temple. It didn't explode. Instead, it burrowed into the ground and began to pulse with sickly crimson light. The jungle vegetation around the impact site withered instantly, trees dying and collapsing into gray ash. Then the ground erupted as dozens of parademons clawed their way to the surface, not launched from the ships above, but grown from the conversion payload itself. By the Force, Bail Organa whispered. More missiles struck the jungle in rapid succession. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one spawning a new cluster of shrieking Parademon warriors that immediately took flight toward the rebel base. The sky above Yavin 4 turned dark with wings and claws. Above the planet, rebel pilots engaged the Apokolipsian warships in desperate combat. Red Squadron leader Garvin Dryce, who would one day lead the assault on the Death Star, found himself facing technology that defied everything he knew about space combat. These things don't maneuver like ships, he reported over the comm, his voice tight with concentration. They're predicting our flight paths, compensating before we even move. It's like they're reading our minds. His wingman's X-wing exploded as an Apokolipsian energy beam tore through its shields like they didn't exist. The beam didn't behave like a turbolaser, it curved in flight, tracking the X-wing through evasive maneuvers, patient and implacable. Break off. Break off. Dryce ordered, but half his squadron was already gone. The survivors scattered, trying to draw fire away from the base below. On the ground, rebel infantry formed defensive perimeters around the temples. Blaster fire lit up the jungle as the first wave of parademons crashed against hastily erected barricades. These weren't the mindless creatures the soldiers expected, the parademons fought with tactical coordination, flanking maneuvers, and disturbing intelligence. One rebel trooper watched in horror as a Parademon caught a thermal detonator mid-flight and threw it back with casual precision. The explosion tore through his squad, and before the smoke cleared, the parademons were among them, claws ripping through armor, dragging the wounded into the jungle. In the command center, Dodonna made the hardest decision of his career. Begin evacuation protocol, he ordered. All non-essential personnel to the transports. Essential staff will hold the line until... General, Willard interrupted, his voice hollow. The transports. They're already engaging them. On the tactical display, Apokolipsian fighters were systematically targeting every ship attempting to leave the atmosphere. 3 GR-75 transport vessels exploded in quick succession, their shields overwhelmed by energy weapons that operated on principles no engineer had ever seen. They were trapped. Leia grabbed a comm link, her voice carrying across all frequencies. All units, fall back to the Great Temple. Establish inner defensive perimeter. We hold until reinforcements. There are no reinforcements, Your Highness, Panica said quietly. The nearest rebel cell is 3 systems away. By the time they arrive, this base will be a conversion facility. She rounded on him, anger and desperation warring in her eyes. Then what do you suggest? Surrender? Let them drag us into those chambers and turn us into monsters. Before Panica could respond, a new alarm blared. The command center's main display shifted to show something impossible, a boom tube opening directly above the Great Temple. The dimensional portal tore through Yavin's atmosphere like a wound in reality itself, and through it descended a single figure. Darkseid landed on the temple's apex with enough force to crack the ancient stone. He surveyed the battle below with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Around him, the air shimmered with heat distortion as the Omega effect passively warped local physics. People of the rebellion, his voice boomed across the battlefield, penetrating comm channels and physical barriers alike. Your resistance is noted and ultimately futile. You have spirit. Courage. These are admirable traits in slaves. Surrender now, and I will ensure your conversion is painless. Continue fighting, and you will experience suffering beyond your comprehension before you serve me anyway. From the command center, Mon Mothma's voice was steady despite the terror she felt. This is Mon Mothma, leader of the Alliance to restore the Republic. We do not negotiate with tyrants. We have fought the Empire for years, and we will fight you with our last breath. Darkseid's expression didn't change, but something that might have been respect flickered in his burning eyes. Spoken like a true leader. How unfortunate that leadership cannot overcome the mathematics of power. He raised one hand, and the Omega beams lanced down from his position, carving through the jungle with surgical precision. 3 defensive emplacements simply ceased to exist, unmade at the molecular level. Rebel soldiers who had survived the Parademon assault, who had held their ground with desperate courage, were reduced to cosmic dust in an instant. Your weapons cannot harm me, Darkseid stated, his tone matter-of-fact rather than boastful. Your defenses are irrelevant. Your courage, while admirable, changes nothing. I am inevitable. I am absolute. I am. A lightsaber ignited behind him. The green blade hummed in the smoke-choked air, held by a figure in desert robes who had appeared on the temple's apex as silently as a ghost. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Master, stood 3 meters from the God of Tyranny with the calm expression of a man who had faced Sith Lords and death itself. You are trespassing, Obi-Wan said mildly, his voice carrying none of the fear that gripped everyone watching. And I'm afraid I must ask you to leave. Darkseid turned slowly, examining this new arrival with genuine curiosity. A Force wielder. One of the extinct Jedi, unless I'm mistaken. You possess power beyond these soldiers, yet you arrive alone. Foolish or suicidal? Neither, Obi-Wan replied. Merely fulfilling a promise I made long ago. To protect those who cannot protect themselves. He shifted into a defensive stance, Sorisu, the ultimate defensive form, perfected through decades of practice. Though I suspect you're accustomed to beings fleeing your presence rather than standing against it. I am accustomed to beings recognizing futility when confronted with it, Darkseid countered. You cannot defeat me, Jedi. Your force is powerful, but it operates within the limitations of your universe's physics. I transcend such limitations. Then you have nothing to fear from one old man with a lightsaber, Obi-Wan said, and there was something in his tone, a hint of the negotiator, the general who had ended countless conflicts through wit and wisdom before resorting to violence, that made even Darkseid pause. The god smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Very well. Let us test the limits of your force against the certainty of my Omega effect. Your courage will be remembered when you serve Apokolips as a Parademon. Darkseid's eyes flared crimson, and the Omega beams erupted forth. Obi-Wan moved with the fluid grace of a master who had spent a lifetime perfecting economy of motion. His lightsaber intercepted the beams, the Kyber crystal channeling force energy to deflect reality-warping power. For a moment, just a moment, the beams scattered, redirected into the sky. Then the lightsaber began to smoke. Obi-Wan felt it through the force, the Kyber crystal screaming as it tried to channel energies it was never designed to contain. The weapon that had served him through the Clone Wars, that had faced Count Dooku and General Grievous, was failing under assault from power that existed outside the rules the Force operated by. But Obi-Wan Kenobi had not survived Order 66 and years of hiding by giving up when the odds turned against him. He released the lightsaber before it exploded, simultaneously reaching deep into the Force and pulling. The ancient Massassi temple stones responded, tons of rock telekinetically ripped from the structure and hurled at Darkseid with enough force to pulverize a battalion. The stones shattered against the god's body like waves against a cliff. Predictable, Darkseid observed, raising one hand. The Omega effect flared, and Obi-Wan felt reality itself twist around him. His connection to the Force didn't sever, the Force was constant, eternal, always present. But the space where he stood suddenly operated under different physical laws, ones where Force manipulation became exponentially more difficult. It was like trying to swim through transparent steel. Obi-Wan staggered, his enhanced reflexes and strength suddenly reduced to baseline human levels. Darkseid strode forward, each step cracking the stone beneath his feet. "You have courage, Jedi," the god acknowledged. "More than most. You faced me knowing you could not win, hoping only to buy time for those below. A noble sacrifice. I will honor it by making your conversion quick." "I wasn't buying time," Obi-Wan gasped, forcing a pained smile despite the crushing pressure of Darkseid's localized reality distortion. "I was providing a distraction." Darkseid's eyes widened fractionally, the first sign of genuine surprise he had shown since arriving in this galaxy. Above them, hyperspace portals bloomed like flowers opening to the sun. Not boom tubes. Not dimensional rifts. Standard Imperial hyperspace exits. 20 star destroyers dropped into Yavin 4's orbit in perfect formation. Leading them was the Executor, Darth Vader's flagship, its wedge-shaped hull bristling with enough firepower to reduce a continent to molten slag. Behind it came vessels bearing the insignias of Grand Admiral Thrawn's 7th Fleet, organized with the Chiss tactician's characteristic precision. And aboard the Executor, standing on the bridge with his respirator creating its rhythmic mechanical breathing, Darth Vader felt his master's presence through the Force, distant, observing, calculating. The Emperor had authorized the unthinkable. An Imperial rescue of the Rebel Alliance. Because if Darkseid wanted the rebellion destroyed, Emperor Palpatine would ensure they survived out of pure spite. "This galaxy," Darkseid said, his tone shifting from casual dismissal to genuine interest, "continues to surprise me. How very entertaining." He looked down at Obi-Wan, then up at the Imperial fleet beginning orbital bombardment of his Parademon swarms. "Our business is not concluded, Jedi. Nor is my conquest of this galaxy. But I am nothing if not patient. I will return. And when I do, your empire and rebellion will burn together." The boom tube erupted around him, cosmic fire consuming the temple's apex. When it collapsed, Darkseid was gone, along with his warships and half the Parademon swarm. The remaining creatures fought with suicidal intensity until Imperial turbolaser fire burned them from the sky. In the command center, Mon Mothma stared at the tactical display showing Imperial ships in defensive formation around their base. Around their base. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. What just happened? Leia whispered. Moth Panica's expression was grim. The enemy of my enemy isn't my friend. But right now, he's the only reason any of us are still alive. On the Executor's bridge, Admiral Piet received coded orders directly from the Emperor. His face paled as he read them. "Lord Vader," he said carefully, "His Majesty commands that we establish communications with the rebel leadership to discuss terms for a temporary ceasefire." Through his mask, Vader's voice carried the weight of a man being forced to swallow poison. "Inform them that the Empire requests a meeting. Neutral ground. Within 48 hours. The words tasted like betrayal of everything the Empire stood for. But Darth Vader had learned long ago that survival required compromise. Even compromises that made him want to ignite his lightsaber and cut through everyone in sight. The neutral ground chosen for the meeting was Bothui, a world that had carefully maintained independence from both Empire and Rebellion through strategic information brokering and aggressive neutrality. The Bothans had built their reputation on knowing everyone's secrets and selling none of them, a policy that made them simultaneously invaluable and universally distrusted. The conference facility was a stark dura-steel structure buried 300 meters beneath Bothui's capital city, shielded against scanning, recording, and force detection. 2 entrances. 2 security details. And a written agreement that any violence would result in both parties being sealed inside and left to resolve their differences permanently. Mon Mothma arrived with Princess Leia, General Dodonna, and Bail Organa. A minimal delegation, but one that represented the rebellion's political and military leadership. They wore no visible weapons, though Leia had a holdout blaster concealed in her boot that Bothan security had graciously ignored detecting. The Imperial delegation emerged from the opposite entrance like a vision from a nightmare. Darth Vader, 7 feet of black armor and mechanical breathing, entered first. His presence filled the room like a physical force, making the air feel heavier, harder to breathe. Behind him came Grand Admiral Thrawn, his blue skin and red eyes marking him as Chiss, his white uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. Moff Panica followed, looking distinctly uncomfortable, flanked by beings he had recently betrayed. And finally, connected via hologram from an undisclosed location, Emperor Palpatine himself, a flickering blue image that somehow felt more threatening than Vader's physical presence. The 2 groups faced each other across a circular table designed for negotiations that typically involved trade disputes and border disagreements. Not meetings between galactic superpowers forced together by existential crisis. This is unprecedented, Mon Mothma began, her voice carefully neutral. The Empire and the Rebellion, meeting as equals to discuss. We are not equals, Palpatine's hologram interrupted, his ancient voice dripping with contempt. Do not mistake desperation for respect. You are insurgents. Terrorists. Criminals who have murdered Imperial personnel and destroyed Imperial property for years. The fact that I tolerate your presence now does not erase your crimes. Leia's hand moved toward her boot, but Bail's restraining touch stopped her. If that's your opening position, Your Majesty, she said, her voice cold, then this meeting is pointless. We'll take our chances with Darkseid. Will you? Thrawn interjected smoothly, his accented voice cutting through the tension. Have you calculated the probability of rebel survival against Apokoliptian forces? I have. It is 0.03%, assuming optimal defensive positioning and complete resource commitment. The Yavin 4 engagement demonstrated that conventional warfare is ineffective against an enemy that converts casualties into reinforcements. He manipulated a holographic display, bringing up tactical analysis of the recent battle. Your pilots demonstrated exceptional courage and skill. They achieved a kill ratio of 1.4 to 1 against Parademon fighters, remarkable against an unknown enemy. However, every rebel pilot lost was recovered and converted within hours. By my calculations, continuing independent resistance would result in complete rebel force transformation into Apokoliptian assets within 6 months. Dodonna studied the data with the grim recognition of a strategist who knew truth when he saw it. And Imperial forces fare better. Marginally, Thrawn admitted. Our numerical superiority provides temporary advantage. But the fundamental problem remains, Darkseid doesn't simply defeat armies. He absorbs them. Every engagement strengthens him while weakening us. Traditional attrition warfare is precisely what he wants. Vader's respirator filled the silence that followed. When he spoke, his mechanically filtered voice carried cold certainty. The Emperor has authorized me to propose terms. A ceasefire between Imperial and Rebel forces. All hostilities suspended. Rebel cells maintain current territorial holdings. Imperial forces withdraw from active pursuit. Duration, until the Darkseid threat is neutralized. And after that? Leia challenged. The moment he's defeated, the Empire resumes hunting us with renewed vigor. Yes, Vader stated flatly, appreciating her directness if nothing else. But you will be alive to be hunted. Continue your current course, and you will be Parademons serving a god who views your freedom as a mathematical error to be corrected. Mon Mothma leaned forward. What guarantee do we have that this isn't an elaborate trap? That the moment we lower our defenses, Imperial forces won't strike. Palpatine's hologram flickered with what might have been amusement. You have no guarantees, Senator. You have only mathematics and necessity. Grand Admiral Thrawn's analysis is available for your review. You may run your own projections. I suspect you will reach identical conclusions. His yellow eyes gleamed. I do not make this offer because I respect you. I make it because Darkseid is a threat to my empire, and I will not allow an interdimensional warlord to take what I have spent decades building. There is, however, one additional factor, Thrawn added, bringing up a new holographic display. Our intelligence has confirmed that Darkseid is not merely conquering territory. He is searching for something specific, this anti-life equation he mentioned. We have intercepted Apokolipsian transmissions indicating systematic surveys of Force-sensitive locations. Ancient Jedi temples. Sith tombs. Force nexuses across the galaxy. Bail Organa's expression shifted to alarm. He thinks the anti-life equation is connected to the Force. He believes the Force may contain elements of the equation, Thrawn clarified. Based on translated communications, the anti-life equation is a mathematical proof that eliminates free will through logical certainty. If such a thing could be derived from the Force's fundamental nature, its binding of all consciousness into a unified field, then whoever possesses it would have absolute control over every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy. The implications crashed through the room like a collapsing building. Leia felt her blood turn to ice. How many Force-sensitives exist? Unknown, Thrawn replied. But Force sensitivity exists on a spectrum. Jedi and Sith represent the extreme end, trained, powerful, dangerous. But millions of beings possess minor sensitivity. Intuition. Luck. Enhanced reflexes. If the anti-life equation could be tailored to target Force sensitivity, he paused, letting them complete the thought. He could control millions, Dodonna finished, his voice hollow. Turn them into an army of Force-sensitive slaves. Worse, Vader interjected, and there was something in his mechanical voice, not quite fear, but close. He could control me. The Emperor. Any Inquisitor. Every Force wielder becomes his puppet, and through us, he gains access to powers this galaxy has spent millennia developing. Palpatine's hologram remained silent, but Mon Mothma noticed something she had never expected to see, uncertainty in the Emperor's eyes. Darth Sidious, who had manipulated the galaxy like a puppet master for decades, had finally encountered a threat he couldn't predict or control. So we're not just fighting for territory or political systems, Mon Mothma said slowly. We're fighting to prevent someone from weaponizing the Force itself. Correct, Thrawn confirmed. Which brings us to the actual purpose of this meeting. Not merely a ceasefire, but coordination. Darkseid is currently establishing strongholds on 17 captured worlds, building what our analysts believe are processing centers for large-scale conversion operations. He is also systematically investigating Force-sensitive locations. We must disrupt both efforts simultaneously. He manipulated the hologram, displaying a galaxy-wide tactical overview. Imperial forces will engage Apokolipsian strongholds directly. Our numerical superiority and heavy capital ships can contest his fortifications. However, we lack the specialized skills necessary for covert operations against his research sites. Leia understood immediately. You want rebel special forces to sabotage his Force research while the Imperial Navy keeps him busy. Precisely, Thrawn acknowledged. Your operatives excel at infiltration, sabotage, and operating behind enemy lines, skills the Empire typically considers distasteful, but undeniably effective. You strike his research operations while Imperial forces draw his attention. He cannot defend everywhere simultaneously. And if we refuse? Bail asked. Vader's response was immediate. Then the Empire proceeds alone. You continue your futile resistance until Darkseid converts you. And when he finds the anti-life equation, he uses it to enslave every being in this galaxy, including your precious civilians you claim to protect. The mechanical breathing filled another long silence. Finally, Mon Mothma spoke, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would define the rebellion's future. We need time to discuss this among our leadership. And we need something in return, a show of good faith beyond mere words. Name your price, Palpatine's hologram said, surprising everyone with his directness. Mon Mothma met his yellow-eyed gaze without flinching. Political prisoners. The ones held on Wobani, Kessel, and Mimban. Release them. If we're risking rebel lives to protect your empire from Darkseid, then you release beings you've imprisoned for opposing your tyranny. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vader's hand moved toward his lightsaber. Thrawn's expression remained neutral, but his eyes flickered with calculation. And Palpatine. Palpatine smiled. A thin, cruel expression that had preceded the destruction of governments and the deaths of Jedi Masters. You dare, the Emperor hissed, negotiate with me? Make demands as though you possess leverage. I possess the leverage of necessity, Mon Mothma replied, her voice steady despite the very real danger of Vader deciding to end negotiations permanently. You need our cooperation. We need assurance that this isn't an elaborate trap. Release the prisoners, and we'll believe your ceasefire is genuine. Refuse, and we'll assume you're simply consolidating forces before striking us once Darkseid is defeated. Thrawn leaned close to Vader, whispering something inaudible. The Dark Lord's respirator accelerated briefly, a sign of agitation, then returned to normal rhythm. Through the Force connection, Vader felt his master's rage simmering like a volcano preparing to erupt, but also, calculation. The Emperor was considering it. Finally, Palpatine spoke. 3 prisons. 2,000 political prisoners. Released into rebel custody within 72 hours. In exchange, rebel forces commit to coordinated operations against Darkseid's research sites. Full intelligence sharing. No independent actions without mutual approval. And, his eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction, if Darkseid is defeated, you return to being enemies of the state with no expectation of leniency. Agreed, Mon Mothma said immediately, before anyone could object. But we want one more thing. A direct communication line between Rebel Command and Imperial Strategic Command. No intermediaries. If Darkseid changes tactics, we need to adapt immediately. Thrawn nodded approval, a gesture so subtle most missed it. Acceptable. I will serve as Imperial liaison. You may designate your counterpart. General Dodonna, Mon Mothma said, and the old general nodded acceptance despite the monumental responsibility being placed on his shoulders. Palpatine's hologram flickered. Then we have an accord. May the Force help us all. Because if we fail, there will be no second chances. The meeting concluded with no handshakes, no signatures, no formal ceremony. Just 2 groups of people who hated each other, bound together by the knowledge that something worse than their hatred was tearing through the galaxy like a plague. As the rebel delegation left through their entrance, Leia looked back once. Vader stood motionless, his mask pointed in her direction. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something through the Force she didn't understand. Not recognition exactly, but resonance. As if some part of the Dark Lord responded to some part of her. Then the moment passed, and he was simply the monster who had tortured her on the Death Star, killed her adoptive father, and hunted rebels across the galaxy. But now, he was a monster on her side. The galaxy had become very strange indeed. Above Bothui, in high orbit where neither delegation could detect it, a boom tube opened briefly. Darkseid's face appeared in the dimensional rift, watching the planet below with calculating interest. Desad, he said quietly, they believe they can cooperate against me. How, predictable. His chief scientist's withered form appeared beside him. Shall we disrupt their alliance, Great One? No, Darkseid replied, a thin smile crossing his stone features. Let them work together. Let them believe coordination gives them advantage. While they focus on my strongholds and research sites, his eyes blazed with the Omega effect. I will be elsewhere, pursuing the real prize. They think they know what I seek. They understand nothing. The boom tube collapsed, leaving only empty space and the distant stars. The alliance had been forged. But in a galaxy where two tyrants had agreed to cooperate, the question remained, would their combined strength be enough to stop a god? Or had they simply made themselves more efficient targets? The Deep Space Research Station designated Imperial Science Facility Omega-7 had been abandoned for 12 years. Built during the Clone Wars to study force anomalies in the Moraband system, ancient homeworld of the Sith, the facility had been quietly mothballed after Republic scientists discovered that prolonged exposure to the Darkseid emanations drove researchers mad. Now its empty corridors drifted in silent orbit above a dead world, forgotten by everyone except the most classified Imperial archives. Darkseid stood in what had once been the facility's primary laboratory, surrounded by holographic records that flickered with corrupted data. His eyes burned as he absorbed information at speeds that would have killed organic minds, decades of research into force theory, midichlorian analysis, ancient Sith holocron translations, and most importantly, mathematical models attempting to quantify the force's fundamental nature. Fascinating, he murmured, his voice echoing through empty halls. They came so close. These Jedi and Sith manipulate a universal field that connects all consciousness, yet they treat it as mysticism rather than mathematics. They speak of balance and will when they should be calculating probability matrices and causal equations. Darkseid worked at a nearby terminal, his twisted fingers flying across controls as he downloaded everything the facility contained. The research is extensive, great one. But incomplete. The scientists abandoned their work before deriving the underlying equations. They feared what they were discovering. Of course they feared it, Darkseid replied, examining a holographic representation of the galaxy with force nexus points highlighted. They were on the verge of understanding that free will is an illusion. That every choice, every decision, every seemingly random act is predetermined by the Force's binding nature. The Jedi called it the will of the Force. They never realized they were describing a deterministic system masquerading as mysticism. He manipulated the hologram, watching lines of connection web across the galaxy, every Force-sensitive being linked through invisible threads of quantum entanglement. The anti-life equation exists here. Not in its complete form, but fragments. Elements. The Force itself is a partial expression of the equation, proof that consciousness can be unified, directed, controlled through mathematical certainty. A new hologram materialized, showing the molecular structure of midichlorians, microscopic organisms that connected living beings to the Force. Darkseid studied them with the intensity of a scientist examining a breakthrough discovery. These midichlorians, he said slowly, his mind already racing ahead to implications. They are the transmission mechanism. Biological conduits that translate quantum probability into tangible power. If I can replicate their function, combine them with Mother Box technology, he turned to Darkseid, and for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, something approaching excitement entered his voice. I could create force sensitivity in any being. And if I control the mechanism that grants the power, I control everyone who possesses it. Darkseid's sadistic mind immediately grasped the possibilities. A galaxy of force wielders, all bound to your will. The Jedi and Sith spent millennia training individuals to master this power. You would mass produce it. More than that, Darkseid corrected. I would weaponize it. The Force flows through all living things, connecting them in a web of causality. If I can introduce modified midichlorians into the galaxy's population, through atmosphere seeding, water contamination, or direct injection, every being becomes force-sensitive. And every being becomes a potential vector for the anti-life equation. He pulled up another file, Imperial Research into Force Suppression Technology. Isilamari, creatures from Moir Kr that created force-neutral bubbles. Void stone, ancient minerals that nullified force powers. The Empire had been studying ways to neutralize Force users for years, developing countermeasures against Jedi survivors. They researched suppression when they should have studied amplification, Darkseid observed. But their work provides valuable data nonetheless. If the Force can be nullified, it can also be controlled. Directed. Enslaved to a single will. His eyes blazed brighter. My will. The facility's proximity alarms suddenly activated. Darkseid's terminal lit up with sensor data, 3 ships approaching from hyperspace. Small, fast, designed for infiltration rather than combat. Rebel vessels. They found us, Darkseid hissed. Imperial intelligence must have shared this location. Of course they did, Darkseid replied calmly. Thrawn is a brilliant strategist. He correctly identified that I would investigate Force research facilities. He sent rebel commandos to disrupt my work while Imperial fleets engage my strongholds. A thin smile crossed his stone features. How very predictable. Shall I activate defenses, Great One? No, Darkseid said, studying the approaching ships with calculating interest. Let them come. I wish to examine these rebels more closely. To understand what drives beings to fight for freedom, when freedom is simply another word for chaos and uncertainty. The rebel assault team consisted of 15 commandos led by Captain Cassian Andor, one of the Alliance's most effective intelligence operatives. They breached the research station through a docking port that showed no signs of habitation, life support was minimal, gravity generators operating at low power, lights flickering sporadically. The perfect abandoned facility. Too perfect. Something's wrong, Cassian whispered into his comlink, his hand steady on his blaster rifle. Scanners show power signatures in the primary lab. Someone's here. His second-in-command, a Bothan named Koth Melon, adjusted his equipment readouts. Could be automated systems. Imperial facilities sometimes maintain minimal operations even after abandonment. Or it's a trap, Cassian replied. Stay sharp. We're here for the research data, then we extract. No heroics. They moved through corridors choked with dust and corrosion, passing laboratories that had been sealed for over a decade. The deeper they went, the more pronounced the wrongness became. The air tasted metallic. Reality felt thin, as if the walls between dimensions had worn too transparent. And then they heard it, a voice that resonated not through their comlinks but directly in their minds. Welcome, children of rebellion. The commando team froze. Blasters raised, scanning for threats, finding nothing. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, bypassing physical sound to imprint directly on consciousness. I am Darkseid. And you have come seeking to disrupt my research. How very brave. How very futile. The laboratory doors ahead cycled open, revealing a chamber bathed in crimson light. At its center stood Darkseid, surrounded by holographic displays showing decades of Imperial research into the Force. His presence was overwhelming, not just physical mass, but existential weight. He was more real than anything around him, as if the universe had decided to pay special attention to this particular 3-meter section of space. Cassian's tactical mind screamed at him to retreat, but his body wouldn't move. None of them could move. They stood frozen, not through paralysis but through sheer overwhelming presence. Darkseid's existence was so absolute that resistance felt not just futile, but conceptually impossible. You fight for freedom, Darkseid observed, walking slowly around the frozen commandos like a predator examining prey. You believe that sentient beings possess inherent rights. That choice matters. That individual can triumph over oppression. He stopped in front of Cassian, looking down at the captain with burning eyes. Let me show you the truth. The Omega effect flared, and Cassian felt his mind open, not violated, but illuminated. He saw himself from outside, every decision he'd ever made laid bare as mathematical probability. His choice to join the rebellion? Predetermined by genetics, upbringing, and environmental factors.
His loyalty to Mon Mothma. Neurochemistry and social conditioning. Even his current thoughts were simply electrons firing in patterns established by causality stretching back to his birth. Free will was an illusion. Every choice was inevitable. Every action predetermined by forces beyond consciousness to perceive, let alone control. You see it now, Darkseid said softly. The truth you've spent your life denying. You are not free. You have never been free. You are a biological machine executing programming written by causality itself. The only difference between you and my parademons is that you maintain the comforting fiction of choice. Cassian's mind reeled, everything he believed crumbling under the weight of mathematical certainty. Beside him, Koth Melon collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his furred face. Other commandos simply stared ahead, minds breaking under the revelation of their own predetermined nature. This is the gift of the anti-life equation, Darkseid continued. Not slavery, but enlightenment. I do not take your freedom, I show you that freedom never existed. And in that revelation, you find peace. Purpose. Liberation from the burden of meaningless choice. One commando, a young Twi'lek woman named Hera, somehow found her voice. If choice doesn't exist, why do you bother conquering? If everything is predetermined, your victory is already certain. Darkseid's expression shifted to something almost resembling approval. An excellent question. And the answer reveals why I am God and you are mortal. Yes, causality dictates outcomes. But I exist outside causality's prison. I am the equation that predetermines existence. My will shapes probability itself. When I choose conquest, the universe arranges itself to make conquest inevitable. This is the difference between wielding the equation and being subject to it. He turned back to the holographic displays. Your empire understands this instinctively, even if they lack the mathematics to prove it. Why else does Palpatine cultivate fear? Fear is predictable. Fear makes beings behave in calculable ways. He rules through behavioral conditioning, just as I rule through equation. The only difference is that he lacks the proof. I do not. Cassian forced himself to speak, pushing words through a mind that felt like it was drowning. Then why, are you telling us this? Why not just kill us? Because killing you would waste valuable data, Darkseid replied. You are going to return to your rebellion. You are going to report everything you've seen. You will tell them that I am studying the Force, seeking to derive the anti-life equation from its mathematical foundations. And they will do exactly what I expect, they will panic. They will accelerate their operations. They will make mistakes born of desperation. He gestured, and the paralysis released. The commandos stumbled, sudden freedom of movement disorienting after frozen helplessness. Take your data, Darkseid said, and Darkseid transmitted the research files directly to the rebel ship's computers. Take your recordings. Tell your leaders everything. It changes nothing. You are all dancing to equations you cannot perceive, and I am the mathematician who wrote them. Cassian wanted to refuse, to fight, to do something other than what this being commanded. But even that desire felt predetermined now, another illusion of choice in a universe governed by mathematical inevitability. Run along, little rebels, Darkseid said with casual dismissal. Your masters await. And when next we meet, you will kneel willingly. Because you will finally understand that kneeling was always what you were going to do. The commandos fled. They stumbled back through corridors, reached their ships, and jumped to hyperspace with desperate speed. And even as they ran, they knew, that Darkseid had allowed their escape. That every step was part of some larger calculation they couldn't perceive. Aboard the lead ship, Cassian stared at the downloaded data with hollow eyes. They had the research. They had intelligence on Darkseid's goals. They had everything they came for. And somehow, that felt like defeat. Back on the research station, Darkseid approached his master. You allowed them to escape with complete data on our research. Why?
Because fear is a more powerful weapon than secrecy, Darkseid replied. They now know I seek to weaponize the Force itself. They will waste resources defending against a threat I have already transcended. While they protect Jedi temples and Sith tombs, I will be pursuing the equation's true location. Which is? Darkseid's eyes burned with satisfaction. The cosmic force itself. Not in any temple or holocron, but in the fundamental structure that binds this galaxy. The ancient Jedi spoke of the living force and the cosmic force, the distinction between individual consciousness and universal connection. They never realized they were describing two halves of the anti-life equation. Control the connection, and you control the individuals. He pulled up a new hologram, a star map showing the deep core, the densest region of the galaxy where stars clustered so tightly that hyperspace travel was nearly impossible. At its center was a single highlighted system. The Wellspring of Life, Darkseid said. Ancient Jedi legends speak of a place where the Force originates, where midichlorians are born, where the very nature of consciousness and the Force intertwine. Your empire never found it. Your Jedi spent millennia seeking it. But I, his smile widened, I have the mathematical tools to calculate its location through Force-sensitive distribution patterns and quantum probability mapping. And if it doesn't exist? Darkseid asked. Then I will create it, Darkseid replied simply. Either way, I will have the anti-life equation. And this galaxy will kneel. The throne room of the Imperial Palace on Coruscant had never been designed for cooperation. Its architecture spoke of dominance, a single throne elevated above all others, shadows carefully positioned to obscure the Emperor while spotlighting those who stood before him. It was a room built to remind visitors of their insignificance. Now it hosted the strangest war council in galactic history. Emperor Palpatine sat upon his throne, yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. To his right stood Darth Vader, a pillar of black armor and mechanical breathing. Grand Admiral Thrawn occupied a position near the holographic tactical display, his red eyes studying data with machine-like precision. And across from them, transmitted via encrypted hologram from an undisclosed rebel location, stood Mon Mothma, General Dodonna, and Princess Leia. Between them floated a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, marked with red indicators showing Apokolipsian strongholds, green markers for Imperial defensive positions, and blue dots representing rebel strike teams. And in the center, highlighted in ominous purple, was a single coordinate in the deep core. The Wellspring of Life, Thrawn stated, his accented voice carrying absolute certainty. Captain Ander's reconnaissance team recovered data indicating Darkseid believes this location is the source of the Force itself. If he reaches it before we can establish defenses, he will have access to the fundamental mechanism underlying Force sensitivity, Palpatine finished, his ancient voice carrying weight that transcended the holographic transmission. The ability to manipulate midichlorians at their source. To control or corrupt the Force itself. For once, the Emperor's tone held no political calculation, only cold recognition of existential threat. Leia studied the purple marker with growing dread. The Wellspring is a legend. Jedi Masters spent centuries searching for it and found nothing. What makes us think it actually exists? Because Darkseid believes it exists, Vader replied, his mechanically filtered voice brooking no argument. And his belief is based on mathematical analysis of Force-sensitive distribution patterns across the galaxy. The data from Omega-7 confirms he has been mapping midichlorian density gradients, tracing them back to a theoretical origin point. Dodonna manipulated the hologram, zooming in on the deep core region. Assuming the Wellspring exists, getting there is nearly impossible. The deep core's stellar density makes hyperspace navigation suicidal. Ships have to drop out of hyperspace every few light years, recalculate, and jump again. It would take weeks to reach that coordinate. For conventional navigation, Thrawn acknowledged. However, Imperial archives contain Clone Wars-era navigation data through the deep core. Republic vessels used these routes during the war to outflank separatist forces. The routes are dangerous, but navigable by experienced crews. We can reach the Wellspring in 4 days. So can Darkseid, Mon Mothma observed. His boom tube technology bypasses hyperspace entirely. He could arrive within hours of deciding to move. The holographic council chamber fell silent as everyone absorbed the tactical reality. They were racing an opponent who could teleport. Palpatine's fingers steepled, his expression hidden in shadow. Then we must ensure he does not learn that we know his destination. Captain Ander's team was allowed to escape with that data, a calculated move on Darkseid's part to misdirect our attention. He expects us to fortify force-sensitive sites across the galaxy while he pursues his true objective unimpeded. So we give him exactly what he expects, Leia said, understanding immediately. Visible defenses at every Jedi temple and Sith tomb. Make it look like we're protecting the wrong targets. While a covert force reaches the Wellspring first, Thrawn continued, his tactical mind meshing perfectly with her strategic thinking despite their opposing allegiances. A small fleet. Fast ships. Mixed Imperial and Rebel personnel. Large enough to establish defensive positions, small enough to avoid detection. Vader's respirator accelerated slightly, his equivalent of a skeptical snort. You propose sending rebels and Imperials on a joint mission into the most dangerous region of the galaxy to defend a location that may not exist against a godlike being who can teleport there instantly. The probability of success is irrelevant, Palpatine interrupted. Because failure means Darkseid gains control of the Force itself. At which point, probability becomes whatever he calculates it to be. The Emperor leaned forward, and for the first time since the meeting began, his face emerged from shadow. He looked old, ancient, even, but his yellow eyes burned with the same intensity that had toppled the Jedi Order. We will send a fleet. We will fortify the Wellspring. And we will kill Darkseid, or die ensuring he cannot claim what he seeks. Mon Mothma's hologram remained perfectly composed, but Leia could see the tension in her mentor's shoulders. Who commands this mission? Imperial or Rebel authority? Joint command, Thrawn stated before Vader could object. Imperial forces provide capital ships and heavy firepower. Rebel forces provide infiltration specialists and force-sensitive operatives. Command decisions require unanimous agreement between ranking Imperial and Rebel officers. Unacceptable, Vader said immediately. Command by committee is a recipe for disaster. There must be a clear chain of authority. Then you propose what? Leia challenged, her holographic image meeting Vader's masked gaze across the tactical display. That we place Rebel lives under Imperial command. That we trust the Empire to value our personnel equally. The temperature in the throne room dropped as Vader's rage manifested physically. Through the Force, Palpatine felt his apprentice's fury, not at the Rebels' defiance, but at the necessity of even having this conversation. Vader had spent years hunting these insurgents. Now he was expected to protect them. Peace, my apprentice, Palpatine said, his tone gentle but carrying absolute authority. Princess Leia raises a valid concern. As do you. Therefore, I propose a solution that will displease everyone equally, the mark of acceptable compromise. He manipulated the holographic display, bringing up personnel files. Lord Vader will command Imperial forces. General Dodonna will command Rebel forces. But the mission's overall strategic coordination will fall to someone both sides can accept. A single file expanded, showing a face that made everyone in the council chamber react with surprise. Obi-Wan Kenobi. You cannot be serious, Vader said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register that had preceded the deaths of countless Imperial officers. The Jedi Master who defended Yavin 4 against Darkseid personally, Palpatine continued as if Vader hadn't spoken. The man who stood alone against a god and survived through tactical thinking rather than raw power. Both Empire and Rebellion know his reputation. Both sides have reason to trust his judgment, if not his allegiances. Kenobi is a traitor and a failure, Vader snarled, each word laced with venom. He abandoned the Jedi Order. He failed to prevent. He survived Order 66, Palpatine interrupted, and there was something in his tone, calculation mixed with genuine curiosity. He evaded the greatest Jedi purge in history through cunning and adaptability. He possesses strategic acumen refined through the Clone Wars and tempered by years of surviving Imperial persecution. And most importantly, the Emperor's smile turned predatory. He is one of the few beings in this galaxy who has directly engaged Darkseid and lived to share tactical analysis. Mon Mothma's hologram showed carefully masked concern. Master Kenobi operates independently. We have no authority to conscript him into this mission. Then you will ask him, Palpatine stated flatly. Nicely. With proper respect for his past service. Explain that the Force itself hangs in the balance. I suspect he will find the duty compelling. Leia wanted to object, but the tactical logic was undeniable. Kenobi commanded respect from surviving Jedi sympathizers, had proven himself against Darkseid, and was one of the few beings that both Empire and Rebellion might actually listen to in crisis. That he was also possibly the only person in the galaxy who could work alongside Vader without being murdered for disagreement was an unstated but crucial factor. If Master Kenobi agrees, Mon Mothma said carefully, then the Rebellion will commit forces to this mission. But we need specifics, fleet composition, personnel commitments, resource allocation. Thrawn stepped forward, manipulating the tactical display with practiced efficiency. Imperial contribution, 6-star destroyers, including the Executor as flagship. 12 support cruisers. 200 fighter squadrons. 30,000 personnel. Rebel contribution, your fastest capital ships, 3 MC-80 cruisers if available. Your best infiltration teams. And most critically, any Force-sensitive individuals willing to volunteer. Why Force-sensitive specifically? Dodonna asked. Because if Darkseid reaches the Wellspring, the battle will not be won through conventional warfare, Thrawn explained. The Force is not merely energy to be manipulated, it is the fundamental connection between consciousness and reality in this galaxy. Fighting for control of its source will require beings who can perceive and interact with that connection directly. Vader's masked gaze turned toward Palpatine, and through their Force bond, the Emperor felt his apprentice's unspoken question. If Force sensitives were critical to this mission's success, why wasn't Palpatine himself leading it? The answer came through their connection, thought to thought, because if Darkseid can corrupt the Force at its source, proximity to the Wellspring makes the most powerful Force wielders the greatest liability. You will go, my apprentice, because your strength is necessary. But I will remain here, ensuring that if the worst occurs, someone survives outside the blast radius with knowledge to resist. It was pragmatism wrapped in self-preservation, the most honest communication Palpatine and Vader had shared in years. We depart in 18 hours, Vader announced to the Council. Imperial vessels will rendezvous at coordinates Thrawn will provide. Rebel ships will join us there. And, his respirator cycled heavily, each breath a struggle against what he was about to say, any rebel personnel who attempt betrayal or sabotage during this mission will be executed immediately. But until Darkseid is defeated, you have my word that Imperial forces will treat you as allies. Coming from Darth Vader, that statement was practically a declaration of brotherhood. Mon Mothma nodded slowly. Then we have an accord. May the Force be with us all. We'll need it. The holographic connection terminated, leaving Vader alone with Thrawn and the Emperor. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Palpatine began to laugh, a dry, crackling sound that held no humor, only bitter irony. 18 months ago, I ordered the Death Star's construction to crush the rebellion permanently, the Emperor mused. Now I send my apprentice to protect them. The galaxy has become strange indeed, Lord Vader. Master, Vader said quietly, what if we cannot stop him? What if Darkseid reaches the Wellspring and gains control of the Force itself? Palpatine's yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness. Then, my apprentice, we will discover whether the Darkseid can resist mathematical certainty. Whether hatred and ambition can overcome equation and logic. His smile turned sharp as a vibroblade. And if we fail, if Darkseid proves truly unstoppable, Then I will ensure he inherits a galaxy burned to ash rather than allow him the satisfaction of claiming my empire intact. It was madness. Spite elevated to apocalyptic contingency planning. It was also the most Sith philosophy Vader had heard in years. I will not fail, Master, Vader stated. See that you don't, Palpatine replied. Because Kenobi will be watching you. Judging you. Remembering the man you were before you became what you are. Do not let sentiment compromise your effectiveness. Through his mask, Vader's burned face twisted into something that might have been a smile on anyone else. Obi-Wan Kenobi is the past. I am Darth Vader. The past means nothing. But even as he said it, even as he believed it, some small fragment of Anakin Skywalker, buried deep beneath cybernetics and hatred, whispered that he was lying. And in the deserts of Tatooine, an old hermit felt a disturbance in the Force. A call. A summons to one final battle. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood, brushed sand from his robes, and looked up at the binary sunset with eyes that had seen too much war. He had hoped his fighting days were over. That he could simply watch over young Luke Skywalker from a distance, protecting the last hope for the Jedi Order. But the Force had other plans. It always did. Very well, Obi-Wan said to the empty desert. One more time. For the galaxy. For the Force. And, his voice dropped to a whisper, for Anakin. Even now. Above Tatooine, stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and in the deep core, something ancient and vast stirred as beings both dark and light prepared to contest its fate. The final battle for the soul of the Force was about to begin. The deep core was beautiful in the way catastrophes were beautiful, terrible, immense, and utterly indifferent to the fragility of those who witnessed it. Stars clustered so densely that their light merged into a continuous nebula of radiation and gravity. Hyperspace routes twisted like threads through a needle's eye, demanding constant recalculation and nerves of Durasteel. The combined Imperial Rebel fleet emerged from their final jump at the calculated coordinates of the Wellspring, and for a moment, just a moment, every being aboard every ship simply stared. The Wellspring of Life was real. It hung in space like a cosmic jewel, a nebula of impossible colors that shouldn't exist in normal space, wrapped around a star that burned with light that felt alive. Tendrils of energy spiraled outward in fractal patterns, and sensor arrays went haywire trying to classify what they were detecting. Not plasma. Not radiation. Pure force energy, visible to technology and consciousness alike. Orbiting the star were structures, ancient, predating any known civilization, built from materials that registered as simultaneously solid matter and crystallized force energy. Temple stations the size of moons, connected by bridges of light that defied physics. This was the birthplace of midichlorians, the origin point of the Force's physical manifestation in the galaxy. And it was empty. Scan for hostiles, Vader commanded from the Executor's bridge, his voice cutting through the awed silence. Deploy fighter screens. Establish defensive perimeter around the largest temple structure. Admiral Pyatt coordinated the response with practiced efficiency, but his voice carried uncertainty. Lord Vader, our scanners are detecting anomalies. There are life signs throughout those structures, but they're not registering as any known species. It's as if the Force itself is inhabited. On the Rebel MC-80 cruiser Liberty, General Dodonna studied similar readings with growing concern. Whatever those structures are, they've been here for millennia. This isn't a weapon or a tool, it's a place of origin. Attacking it could have consequences we can't predict. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood between both command structures, physically aboard the Executor but connected via holocom to Rebel leadership, serving as the bridge between two forces that still didn't quite trust each other. He had aged since Vader last saw him, his beard gone white, his face lined with years of hiding. But his presence in the Force remained strong, centered, unshakable. The Wellspring is not merely a location, Obi-Wan said, his voice carrying the calm certainty that had once made him the negotiator. It is a nexus point where the living force and cosmic force intersect. Where individual consciousness touches universal connection. Darkseid seeks to control this intersection, to rewrite the fundamental equations governing how force sensitivity manifests. Then we destroy it, Vader stated flatly. If he cannot claim it, he cannot use it. Destroy the source of the force. Obi-Wan met his former apprentice's masked gaze without flinching. That would eliminate force sensitivity throughout the galaxy. Every Jedi, every Sith, every force-sensitive child yet to be born, erased. Is that truly what you propose, Anakin? The use of his former name made Vader's hand clench into a fist. Through the Force, Obi-Wan felt the spike of rage, pain, and something else, something that might have been shame. But when Vader spoke, his voice was cold as the void. I am not Anakin. I am Darth Vader. And I will do whatever is necessary to prevent Darkseid from claiming this galaxy. If that requires destroying the Force itself, so be it. You're afraid, Obi-Wan said softly, and around them Imperial officers suddenly found reasons to focus intently on their stations. No one accused Darth Vader of fear and lived. You felt what Darkseid can do. How his power operates outside the rules you've spent decades mastering. And you're terrified that if he gains control of the Force, you'll become his puppet. Vader's lightsaber ignited, the crimson blade humming with barely restrained fury. Obi-Wan didn't move, didn't reach for his own weapon, simply stood there with the infuriating calm that had driven Anakin mad even before the fall to the dark side. Stand down, Lord Vader, Grand Admiral Thrawn's voice cut through the tension with clinical precision. Master Kenobi's psychological assessment, while tactless, is strategically relevant. Your emotional investment in preventing Darkseid's victory stems from recognizing that his control paradigm would supersede your master's. This is acceptable motivation. But destroying the Wellspring should be contingency, not primary strategy. The lightsaber remained active for 3 more seconds, each one stretching like an eternity, before Vader deactivated it. Speak quickly, Admiral. My patience is not infinite. Thrawn manipulated the tactical display, highlighting the temple structures. Analysis of the Wellspring's architecture suggests it functions as both source and filter. Midi-chlorians originate here, but their distribution throughout the galaxy follows specific patterns: force-sensitive bloodlines, regions of concentrated force energy, moments of cosmic significance. If we can understand the distribution mechanism, we can potentially lock Darkseid out at the source level. You're proposing we hack the Force, Leia's hologram said incredulously. That's impossible. The Force isn't a computer system. Isn't it? Thrawn countered. Captain Ander's intelligence indicated Darkseid views the Force as a deterministic system, a mathematical field governed by equations. If he's correct, then the Force operates according to rules, even if those rules transcend conventional physics. Rules can be understood. Understood rules can be manipulated. Obi-Wan stroked his beard thoughtfully. The ancient Jedi spoke of the Force having a will, of being guided by purpose beyond individual comprehension. What you're describing would require us to interface with that will directly. To communicate with the Force itself as if it were a sentient entity. Is it not? Thrawn asked simply. The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. Was the Force sentient? Jedi philosophy was divided on the matter. Some believed it was a passive energy field. Others claimed it had intention, will, purpose. The Sith typically didn't care, they simply took what power they could seize. Before anyone could answer, every sensor array on every ship screamed simultaneous warnings. A boom tube erupted at the system's edge, not one, but dozens, tearing holes in reality like wounds in flesh. Through them poured Apokolipsian warships by the hundreds, followed by Parademons swarms that darkened the starfield. And at the center of it all, standing on a command platform that simply floated in the void without need for life support, was Darkseid. I see you received my invitation, the God of Tyranny's voice boomed across all frequencies, bypassing communication systems to resonate directly in the minds of every being present. How gratifying. I expected more resistance to reach this place, but you've saved me the trouble of hunting you system by system.
The combined fleet immediately went to battle stations. Turbolasers powered up. Fighters launched. Shields came to full strength. Thousands of personnel across dozens of ships prepared for combat with desperate efficiency. And Darkseid simply watched, his burning eyes sweeping across the assembled forces with casual dismissal. "You brought your empire and your rebellion," he observed. "United against common threat. How very predictable. You believe that coordination gives you advantage. That your combined strength can overcome my singular will." His smile was terrible to behold. "Let me demonstrate why gods do not fear the unity of mortals." He raised both hands, and the Omega effect blazed to life, not directed at the fleet, but at the wellspring itself. Reality-warping energy lanced toward the ancient temple structures, seeking to penetrate them, to claim their power, to rewrite the fundamental equations governing force sensitivity at its source. The temples responded. Light erupted from the crystallized structures, pure force energy given physical form, blazing with intensity that made stars seem dim. It met Darkseid's Omega effect in the space between fleet and temples, and where the two powers collided, reality simply stopped making sense. Space folded. Time stuttered. Cause and effect became suggestions rather than laws. "Fascinating," Darkseid breathed, his tone carrying genuine excitement. "The Force resists. It has defensive mechanisms. Survival instincts. This confirms my hypothesis. It is not merely energy, but a form of distributed consciousness protecting itself from external manipulation." He intensified his assault, pouring more Omega effect into the attack. The temple's light flickered, dimmed, began to fail. Whatever ancient defenses protected the wellspring, they were not designed to resist power that rewrote reality's fundamental rules. "All ships, concentrate fire on Darkseid's position," Vader commanded. Now. The combined Imperial Rebel fleet opened fire as one, turbolasers, ion cannons, proton torpedoes, every weapon available converging on a single 3-meter target. The sheer volume of energy should have vaporized anything short of a planet's core. Darkseid raised one hand almost casually, and the Omega effect manifested as a spherical barrier around him. The incoming fire struck the barrier and simply stopped. Not reflected. Not absorbed. Frozen in stasis, hanging in space like a display of fireflies. "Your weapons amuse me," Darkseid said, and with a gesture, redirected the captured energy back toward the fleet. The Executor's shields flared as its own turbolaser fire struck it. 3 rebel cruisers took direct hits from their own missiles. A Star Destroyer's bridge exploded as ion cannons it had fired moments before detonated against its command tower. "He's toying with us," Thrawn observed with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying data. "Demonstrating superiority before pressing his advantage. This is psychological warfare. He wants us to feel helpless before the actual assault begins. Then we give him what he doesn't expect," Obi-Wan said quietly. Through the Force, he reached out, not to attack Darkseid, but to touch the wellspring itself. To communicate with the ancient consciousness that dwelled within those temple structures. And the Force answered. Images flooded Obi-Wan's mind, visions of the galaxy's birth, of the first midichlorians forming in primordial oceans, of consciousness emerging from chaos and reaching out to touch other consciousness, creating the web of connection that would become known as the Force. He saw civilizations rise and fall, Jedi and Sith wage their eternal war, and through it all, the Force flowing, adapting, persisting. And he saw what Darkseid truly sought, not merely control of Force sensitivity, but the equation that governed how consciousness itself emerged from matter. The anti-life equation wasn't just about domination. It was about rewriting the fundamental nature of existence so that free will, the unpredictable chaos of choice, could be eliminated from reality permanently. If he succeeded, the galaxy wouldn't just be conquered. It would be corrected. Made logical. Made certain. Made dead in every way that mattered. "We can't let him reach the core," Obi-Wan said, his voice strained from the Force vision's intensity. "The temples are just the outer layer. The true wellspring is inside the star itself, where midichlorians are born from pure force energy. If he gains access to that, then he controls the source code of consciousness in this galaxy. Thrawn finished. Unacceptable. All forces, new objective, establish perimeter around the star. Nothing reaches it. Not Darkseid, not his forces, not even if it costs every ship we have. On the rebel cruiser Liberty, General Dodonna made the hardest calculation of his military career. They had 63 ships against hundreds of Apokolipsian vessels. They had thousands of fighters against millions of Parademons. And they had minutes, maybe hours, before Darkseid's superior power simply overwhelmed their defenses. All rebel personnel, he said, his voice carrying across encrypted channels to every rebel ship and fighter, this is General Dodonna. We joined this fleet knowing we might not return. That our deaths might not earn victory, only delay defeat. But right now, delay is enough. Every second we hold this line is another second the Force itself continues to exist. Another second beings across the galaxy remain free. So we hold. We fight. We die if necessary. And we make Darkseid pay for every meter of space with enough blood and wreckage that the stars themselves remember. On the Executor, Vader listened to the transmission and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, respect for an enemy. Dodonna had no illusions about victory. He simply understood duty. Imperial forces, Vader's voice boomed across all Imperial channels, you serve an empire built on order, strength, and the dominance of human will over chaos. That empire is threatened by a being who would replace our order with his own certainty. Who would make the Emperor himself a puppet dancing to equations. This will not stand. We are the Empire. We bow to no one. Least of all to a pretender god who mistakes mathematics for power. So we will show him what true power means, the power of beings who choose to fight even when logic says defeat is certain. Because that choice, that defiance, is what separates us from the machines. From the calculations. From the predetermined certainty he would impose on existence itself. It was possibly the most Vader had spoken in a single transmission in years. And every word burned with conviction that transcended mere loyalty to the Emperor. This was personal. The Apokolipsian fleet surged forward, and the battle for the Wellspring of Life began in earnest. Parademons swarmed like locusts, crashing against fighter screens in waves of claw and fang. Apokolipsian warships advanced with inexorable purpose, their weapons tearing through shields designed to withstand turbolaser fire. And at the center of it all, Darkseid walked through the void toward the star, reality bending around him with each step, the Omega effect blazing brighter with each meter gained. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood on the Executor's observation deck, watching the god advance, and made a decision that would define everything that followed. I'm going out there, he said quietly. Vader's masked head turned toward him. That is suicide. Perhaps, Obi-Wan acknowledged. But I'm the only one here who can interface with the Force at the level necessary to reinforce the Wellspring's defenses. And if I can buy even a few more minutes. He didn't need to finish. Vader understood. They all understood. Someone had to stand between a god and the source of the Force itself. And somehow, impossibly, that someone was Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again. Obi-Wan Kenobi walked through vacuum as if it were solid ground. The Force sustained him, breath where there was no air, warmth where space held only absolute zero, protection against radiation that would have killed an unshielded human in seconds. He had never attempted anything like this before, never stretched his connection to the Force so far beyond conventional limits. But the Wellspring responded to his presence, amplifying his abilities, welcoming him as a servant of the light returning home after a long absence. Behind him, the combined fleet fought with desperate fury. X-Wings and TIE fighters wove between Apokolipsian warships in a deadly ballet, sacrificing themselves in suicidal runs to destroy conversion chambers before they could process captured pilots. Star destroyers and rebel cruisers formed a defensive wall, their overlapping shields creating a barrier of energy between Darkseid and the star.
It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Darkseid advanced through the chaos like a force of nature, Omega beams lancing out to disintegrate anything that stood in his path. A rebel corvette exploded. A Star Destroyer's engines failed as reality-warping energy convinced its fusion reactors that atomic bonds were optional. Parademons swarmed the wounded vessels, dragging survivors screaming into conversion chambers. But Obi-Wan walked forward, and the Force walked with him. Persistent, aren't you? Darkseid's voice resonated directly in Obi-Wan's mind, bypassing the vacuum. The Jedi who stood alone at Yavin 4. Who survived my interest through wisdom rather than power. And now you come to face me again, armed with nothing but conviction and a connection to an energy field that cannot save you. Obi-Wan stopped 50 meters from the god, close enough to see his burning eyes, close enough to feel the Omega effect warping space around him. This close, the sheer presence was overwhelming, like standing before a black hole, knowing that one wrong move meant being torn apart by forces beyond comprehension. I come, Obi-Wan said calmly, his voice carried through the Force itself, because someone must. Because the Force is not merely power to be claimed or a tool to be wielded. It is the connection that binds all living things. The proof that consciousness matters, that choice exists, that free will is not an illusion but the fundamental nature of sentient existence. And I will not allow you to corrupt it into a cage. Darkseid studied him with something approaching curiosity. You speak of free will as if it were sacred. Yet your entire philosophy revolves around surrender, becoming one with the Force, letting it guide your actions, accepting its will over your own. How is that different from the certainty I offer? Because the Force does not command, Obi-Wan replied. It suggests. It guides. But ultimately, we choose whether to listen. Every Jedi who falls to the dark side proves that free will exists, that beings can reject the Force's guidance and choose their own path, no matter how destructive. That chaos, that unpredictability, that terrible freedom, that is what makes consciousness meaningful. And I will prove you wrong, Darkseid stated, raising both hands. The Omega effect erupted from him like twin stars going supernova, reality-warping energy that would unmake Obi-Wan at the quantum level, that would erase the concept of Obi-Wan Kenobi from existence's equations. Obi-Wan didn't defend. Didn't dodge. Didn't even raise a barrier. Instead, he opened himself completely to the Force. Every wall he had built over decades of discipline, every control he had mastered, every limitation he had accepted, he released them all. The Force flooded through him with such intensity that his body became translucent, more energy than matter, a living conduit for power that predated galaxies. The Omega beams struck him and passed through. Not because they were deflected, but because in that moment, Obi-Wan Kenobi wasn't entirely physical. He existed in the space between matter and energy, where the Force itself dwelled. The Omega effect could rewrite physical reality, but it couldn't touch something that had temporarily transcended physicality. Impossible, Darkseid breathed, and for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, genuine surprise colored his voice. You're not defending. You're becoming. Merging your consciousness with the Force field itself. Not merging, Obi-Wan's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing across frequencies that transcended sound. Remembering. We are all part of the Force, Darkseid. Every consciousness is a note in its symphony. You see this as weakness, as proof that individuality is an illusion. But you're wrong. The Force is strong because of the diversity of voices within it. Because every being adds their unique perspective to the whole. Darkseid's eyes blazed brighter. Then let me silence those voices. Starting with yours. He unleashed the full power of the Omega effect, not a targeted attack, but an area assault that rewrote the fundamental nature of space itself. The equations governing reality bent, twisted, reformed into structures that made consciousness impossible, that eliminated the quantum uncertainty necessary for thought to emerge from matter. And Obi-Wan held the line. Through him, the Force poured its full defensive power.
The wellspring blazed like a second star, ancient temples channeling energy that had birthed consciousness in this galaxy. For a moment, just a moment, Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Force were one, and that unity held against the mathematical certainty of the anti-life equation. But only for a moment. Obi-Wan's physical form began to fail. His connection to the Force was absolute, but his body was still mortal, flesh and bone never designed to channel this much power. He felt himself burning from the inside, cells dying and being reborn through Force energy in a cycle that couldn't sustain itself indefinitely. "You're dying," Darkseid observed. "Consuming yourself to power a defense that only delays the inevitable." Admirable. Futile. But admirable. Then, Obi-Wan gasped, his form flickering between solid and translucent. "I'll make sure, the delay, counts." Through the Force, he reached out, not to attack Darkseid, but to touch every Force-sensitive being in the fleet. Vader. The handful of surviving Jedi hidden among rebel ranks. Even the Emperor, watching from distant Coruscant through his connection to Vader. Every consciousness that could perceive the Force felt Obi-Wan's presence, his message, his final lesson. The Force is not just power. It is choice. Every moment, every decision, every unpredictable act of consciousness pushing back against deterministic certainty. He wants to make you predictable. To reduce you to equations. To prove that free will is an illusion. So prove him wrong. Choose. Act. Be unpredictable. Be alive. Be free. And something miraculous happened. Aboard the Executor, Darth Vader felt his old master's message resonate through every circuit and cell of his broken body. Felt the challenge implicit in those words, choose. Not as the Emperor's apprentice. Not as a slave to the dark side or to Palpatine's manipulations. But as Anakin Skywalker, the being who had chosen to save Padme, chosen to destroy the Jedi, chosen to become Vader. Those choices had been wrong. Destructive. Born of fear and rage and pain. But they had been his. All Imperial forces, Vader commanded, his voice carrying across every channel with renewed purpose, concentrate all fire on the space between Darkseid and the star. Maximum power. Every weapon. Overload reactors if necessary. We hold this line. On the rebel cruisers, pilots who had been falling back to regroup felt the same message, the same challenge. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were proving that conscious beings could defy mathematical certainty through sheer unpredictable will. Red Squadron, a young pilot named Wedge Antilles transmitted, his voice steady despite flying a damaged X-wing held together by hope and welding, form up on me. We're making a run at Darkseid's command platform. It's suicide, but so was Yavin 4, and we won that one. Across the fleet, similar decisions were being made. Crews choosing to ram Apokolipsian warships rather than be converted. Gunners overloading weapons to their destruction to get one more shot. Engineers rerouting life support to shields, sacrificing their own survival for the mission. Every choice illogical. Every decision defying rational calculation. Every act a middle finger to the anti-life equations claim that behavior was predetermined. Darkseid felt it, felt the cascade of unpredictability rippling through the battle. Felt his careful calculations becoming worthless as beings chose sacrifice over survival, defiance over logic, hope over mathematical certainty. Fascinating, he said, and despite everything, his tone carried something that might have been respect. You actually believe that chaos is strength. That unpredictability gives you advantage. Let me show you why you're wrong. He turned away from Obi-Wan, a calculated insult, and directed the full force of the Omega effect at the Wellspring star itself. Not at its surface, but through it, reaching for the core where midichlorians were born, where the Force's physical presence first manifested in this galaxy. The star screamed. It wasn't sound, stars don't make sound in vacuum, but every Force-sensitive being in the system felt it. The fundamental frequency of consciousness itself distorting under assault, reality's underpinnings being rewritten according to equations that eliminated uncertainty. And in that moment, Obi-Wan made his final choice. He released his hold on physical existence entirely. His body dissolved into pure force energy, joining the wellspring itself. His consciousness, every memory, every lesson learned, every moment of wisdom and foolishness, became part of the galaxy-spanning field that connected all living things. Obi-Wan Kenobi ceased to exist as an individual. But the Force itself became stronger. The wellspring blazed with renewed power, amplified by the willing sacrifice of a Jedi Master who had given everything, not for victory, but for time. The defensive barriers around the star solidified, holding against Darkseid's assault with renewed strength. Aboard the Executor, Vader felt his old master disappear from the Force. Not die, Jedi didn't die, they became one with the Force. But truly ceased to exist as the being he had known. The master who had trained him. The brother who had betrayed him. The enemy he had hunted for years. Gone. By choice. For a galaxy that had never appreciated his sacrifice. And for the first time since burning on Mustafar's shores, Darth Vader felt something other than hatred or pain. He felt loss. Master, Vader whispered, his mechanically filtered voice carrying grief that no one else could hear. Through their Force bond, Emperor Palpatine felt his apprentice's anguish and did something unprecedented. He offered no mockery, no exploitation of the pain. For once, the Emperor simply acknowledged the weight of what Vader had witnessed. He chose his path. Now choose yours. Will you honor his sacrifice, or allow it to be wasted? Vader's hands clenched into fists. Then, moving with purpose that transcended simple programming or Darkseid compulsion, he strode to the Executor's fighter bay. Admiral Piet, he commanded over his comlink, you have the bridge. Continue defensive operations. I am going to settle this personally. Before Piet could protest, Vader was in his personal TIE Advanced, launching from the hangar with dozens of TIE fighters forming an escort wing. Not because he ordered them to. Because they chose to follow Vader into almost certain death. The irony was not lost on the Dark Lord. Darkseid watched the TIE swarm approach with calculating interest. The machine man comes to avenge his mentor. How very predictable. I don't come for revenge, Vader's voice carried across the void through Force amplification. I come because Obi-Wan was right. Because no matter how powerful you are, no matter how inevitable your equations claim to be, you cannot account for beings who choose sacrifice over survival. Defiance over logic. Hope over certainty. Then you will die proving nothing, Darkseid replied, raising his hands. The Omega beams prepared to fire. And every ship in the combined fleet fired simultaneously at Darkseid's position. Not at his command platform. Not at his shields. Directly at him, with every weapon overloaded to maximum power, captains sacrificing their vessel's power cores to get one massive coordinated strike. Thrawn's tactical genius. Dodonna's strategic timing. Mon Mothma's coordination. And Vader's bait, drawing Darkseid's attention while the fleet prepared its killing blow. The combined fire of 63 capital ships and 300 fighters struck Darkseid as a single point of light that briefly outshone the wellspring itself. When the light faded, Darkseid still stood. His armor was cracked. His stone skin showed fissures that leaked something that might have been blood or might have been molten equations. For the first time since arriving in this galaxy, he looked damaged. You actually hurt me, Darkseid said, his voice carrying what might have been astonishment. Primitive weapons powered by conventional physics, and you hurt me. Because you coordinated. Because you chose sacrifice. Because you defied the logical outcome. He looked at the wellspring, then at the battered fleet, then back at Vader's approaching fighter. And for the first time, Darkseid made a calculation he had never needed before. Cost-benefit analysis. He could take the wellspring. Could fight through the remaining defenses and claim the Force's source. But it would cost him. These beings had proven they would die before surrendering, and enough deaths would accumulate to actual damage. His forces were being depleted faster than conversion could replace them. And most significantly, the galaxy now knew he was vulnerable. "This is not defeat," Darkseid stated, his voice carrying absolute certainty despite the contradiction. "This is a recalculation. You have proven more resilient than anticipated. Your unpredictability creates variables I cannot immediately solve for. Therefore, I will withdraw. Study your chaos. Derive new equations that account for irrational sacrifice." "You're retreating," Vader said, disbelief evident even through his mechanical filter. "I am adapting," Darkseid corrected. "The anti-life equation exists. I will find it. But I need not rush when time itself is meaningless to gods. I will return, Empire. I will return, Rebellion. And when I do, I will have accounted for your chaos. Your sacrifice will have been calculated. Your hope will be predicted. And you will kneel, not through force, but through understanding that kneeling was always what you were going to do." The boom tubes erupted throughout the system, massive dimensional rifts that swallowed Apokoliptian warships and Parademon swarms. Darkseid walked backward through the largest portal, his burning eyes never leaving the combined fleet. "Remember this moment," he said as the portal began to collapse. "Remember that you survived not through strength, but through acceptable losses I chose not to accept. Next time, I will." The portal closed, and Darkseid was gone. Silence fell across the battlefield, the strange, ringing silence that follows combat's end. Damaged ships drifted. Fighter wreckage tumbled through space. And where Obi-Wan Kenobi had stood, there was only the Wellspring's light, burning brighter than before. "Status report," Vader commanded, his voice hollow. The numbers came in. 21 ships destroyed. 37,000 personnel killed or converted. Another 42,000 wounded. Fighter losses exceeding 60%. The defensive fleet was shattered. But the Wellspring still shone. The Force still flowed. And across the galaxy, billions of beings remained free to make choices, good, bad, or incomprehensible. On the Liberty, General Dodonna stared at casualty reports with the weight of command pressing down like a physical force. So many dead. So many sacrificed. For what might be only a temporary reprieve. But temporary reprieve was more than they'd had yesterday. On Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine sat upon his throne and contemplated the tactical data with cold calculation. Darkseid had been driven off, yes. But not defeated. Not killed. Not even truly hurt beyond his pride. He would return. And next time, he would be prepared for their tactics. The galaxy had won a battle. But the war was far from over. In the Wellspring's light, where Obi-Wan had dissolved into the Force, Vader's fighter drifted silently. Through the dark side, through his pain and his hatred, Vader felt something he couldn't quite name. His old master was gone, but not dead, present in the Force, part of everything now. "Goodbye, old friend," Vader whispered, knowing Obi-Wan couldn't hear, needing to say it anyway. "You were right. About so many things. Not about everything." Vader was still Sith. Still served the Emperor. Still believed in order through strength. But in this moment, floating in the light of the Force's birthplace, even Darth Vader could admit that Obi-Wan's choice, his sacrifice, had meant something. The combined fleet began the long journey home. Imperial and Rebel ships traveling together, bound by shared trauma and the knowledge that something worse than their hatred existed. The ceasefire would hold. For now. And somewhere beyond dimensional barriers, in a fortress built on dominance and certainty, Darkseid studied the data from his encounter with this strange galaxy. He had been surprised. Impressed. And ultimately, temporarily defeated. But gods were patient. And the anti-life equation was eternal. He would return. The galaxy would be ready. It had no other choice. The alliance between Empire and Rebellion proved more fragile than Durasteel and more necessary than oxygen. In the months following the Battle of the Wellspring, both sides maintained the ceasefire, though patrols eyed each other with suspicion and weapons remained hot at the slightest provocation. Emperor Palpatine accelerated Death Star construction, now viewing the superweapon not as a tool to crush the rebellion, but as a potential deterrent against Darkseid's return. Grand Admiral Thrawn established defensive perimeters around Force-sensitive locations, fortifying Jedi temples and Sith tombs against dimensional intrusion. The rebellion quietly grew in the shadow of the greater threat. Systems that once feared Imperial reprisal now calculated that a divided galaxy could not face Apokolips. Mon Mothma leveraged the political capital of having fought beside the Empire, recruiting new cells with the argument that freedom meant nothing if Darkseid claimed the galaxy. And Darth Vader changed. Not overtly. Not in ways the Emperor could quantify. But those who knew him before noticed he no longer strangled officers for minor failures. He questioned orders more frequently. And sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he would stand in meditation chambers and simply feel the Force. Not the dark side. Not power. Just the connection that bound all living things. Obi-Wan's sacrifice had planted a seed. Whether it would grow into redemption or simply wither under the dark side's shadow remained to be seen. Across the galaxy, Force-sensitive children were born, each one representing the Wellspring's continued function. Midi-chlorians flowed through living beings, maintaining the connection between consciousness and the cosmic force. The anti-life equation remained unfound, existing as a mathematical possibility rather than a realized certainty. But in the unknown regions, dimensional rifts flickered occasionally. Boom tube signatures detected and catalogued. Darkseid had not forgotten. He was simply being methodical, studying the galaxy's chaos, deriving equations that accounted for the unpredictable nature of free will. The galaxy had won a battle through sacrifice and improbable coordination. It had proven that consciousness could defy mathematical certainty, that choice mattered even against overwhelming power. But it had not won the war. That struggle, the battle for the very nature of existence, was only beginning. And when Darkseid returned with equations refined through analysis of their defiance, the galaxy would face a threat that had learned from defeat. Until then, Empire and Rebellion prepared. The Force flowed. And the memory of a Jedi Master who had become one with that Force reminded them all that sometimes the most powerful weapon against certainty was simply the choice to keep fighting, even when logic said hope was impossible. After all, hope had never been logical. It had simply been necessary.